Brown Book of the Hitler Terror by Lord Marley, Chapter 4, Part 2. Goebbels' plan is carried out. Dr. Oberfohren shows in his memorandum that Goebbels thought it necessary to heighten the effect of the material alleged to have been discovered in Karl Liebknecht's house by an incident of some kind. He thought that he would achieve the greatest success, we continue to give Dr. Oberfohren's account, by a series of acts of arson which were to culminate in a fire in the German Reichstag on February 27th. It was agreed that the most important Nazi leaders, Hitler, Goering, and Goebbels, were not to make any engagements to speak at election meetings on that date, but were to be in Berlin. We give below an announcement published in the Völkischer Beobachter of the election speeches which would have been made by Hitler. It is especially noticeable that Hitler kept free from the dates from the 25th to the 27th of February. February 23rd, Frankfurt am Main. February 24th, Munich. February 28th, Leipzig. March 1st, Breslau. March 2nd, Berlin. March 3rd, Hamburg. March 4th, Königsberg. The Völkischer Beobachter adds, it is possible that election meetings will also be arranged for February 25th and 26th. The time of the meetings will be between 8 and 9 p.m. So, in order to be prepared for emergencies, Hitler had kept free the dates from February 25th to 27th. But in any event, it was announced beforehand that Hitler could in no circumstances speak in any election meetings on February 27th. Contradictions in the official reports. The first official report stated that a police officer noticed people carrying lighted torches in the dark building, and that he succeeded in capturing the criminal. It further stated that the criminal was found in one of the cellars, and allowed himself to be arrested without showing any resistance. On March 4th, however, a further statement describes the arrest of van der Lubbe as follows. Police on the Brandenburg Tor side of the Reichstag noticed the fire in the building. One of the police saw torches quite clearly and immediately fired. At first there was some doubt about this incident. Since then, however, the marks of the bullets have actually been found. The police then rushed into the Reichstag. They found in the lobby, not as was originally reported, in the cellars, the man Marinus van der Lubbe, who was there overpowered by one of the officers after considerable resistance. This is the first contradiction in the official reports. Charges against Torgler and Köhnen. On the evening of March 1st, the official Pressedienst issued the following statement. The official investigation of the grave act of incendiarism in the building of the German Reichstag has up to the present shown that at least 7 persons must have been required for the bringing in of the inflammable material alone, while the placing of it and simultaneous setting fire to the various points in the huge building must have required at least 10 persons. No doubt whatever that the incendiaries were so completely familiar with all the details of the vast building that only unrestricted access over a number of years could have given this definite knowledge of all the rooms. Grave suspicion therefore rests on the Communist Party deputies, who particularly in recent weeks have been noticeably often meeting in the Reichstag building under the most diverse pretexts. This familiarity with the Reichstag building and with the duty arrangements of the officials also explains the fact that for the time being only the Dutch Communist who was caught in the act was arrested, as after he had carried out his criminal deed he was unable to escape owing to his ignorance of the building. The arrested man, who is also known in Holland as extremely radical, has been continuously present at the meetings of the Communist Action Committee, and was drawn in to carry out the act of incendiarism. The investigation has further established that 3 witnesses, some hours before the outbreak of the fire, saw the arrested Dutch criminal in the company of the Communist deputies Torgler and Köhnen in the corridors of the Reichstag at about 8 o'clock in the evening. A mistake on the part of these witnesses is out of the question in view of the criminal's appearance. as moreover the deputies' entrance to the Reichstag is closed at 8 p.m., and the Communist deputies, Torgler and Koenen, at about 8:30 p.m., asked for their coats and hats to be brought to their rooms, and only left the building through another door at about 10 p.m. Extremely grave suspicion rests on these two Communists, for it was between these times that the fire was arranged. The rumor that Deputy Torgler voluntarily presented himself at police headquarters is not correct. It is true that through his legal adviser he asked for a safe conduct when he realized that escape was impossible. But this was refused, and the deputy was arrested. On March 4th, the chief of the political police issued a report stating that, insofar as the investigation has up to now produced results giving rise to well-founded suspicion of the complicity of third persons, in the interests of the pending prosecution and of the security of the state, no statement can be made. So that on March 1st grave suspicion rests on Torgler and Koenen, and the security of the state does not prevent the announcement of the grounds for this suspicion. On March 4th any information bearing on the grounds for suspicion would endanger the security of the state. This is the second contradiction. In the Pressedienst message of March 1st, which has already been quoted, it is stated that Torgler and Koenen left the Reichstag building at about 10 p.m. According to the messages issued by the Wolf Bureau and the Telegrafen Union and the foreign correspondents, the fire was discovered in the time between 9 and 9:15 p.m. At 9:15, the fire brigade started operations. At about the same time, the police surrounded the Reichstag and prevented any access to it. A few minutes after the fire had been discovered, Göring arrived on the spot, and shortly after his arrival Hitler, Goebbels, Papen, and Prince August Wilhelm also arrived. But in spite of this, the deputies Torgler and Koenen quietly left the burning Reichstag, which was cordoned off by the police and surrounded by a crowd of thousands of people, and it did not occur to anyone to ask them a single question. This is the third contradiction. A complete alibi. Two waiters in the Aschinger restaurant, near the Friedrichstrasse station, have deposed on oath that the Reichstag deputy Torgler took his evening meal in the restaurant not later than 8:30. Torgler must therefore have left the Reichstag, at the very latest, soon after 8 o'clock, and not at 10 o'clock, as the official statement asserts. A sworn deposition made by the Reichstag deputy Wilhelm Koenen is printed below. This shows that Torgler and Koenen left the Reichstag that evening between 8:10 and 8:15 p.m. We give the deposition in full, because Koenen arrived at the Reichstag at about 6:30 p.m. on February 27th, and was with Torgler until 1:30 a.m. the following morning. These two deputies have a complete alibi, which shows that there is not a word of truth in the charge against them made by the Hitler government. Koenen's deposition is as follows. In the afternoon of February 27th, I went, as I had done almost every day of the previous week, to the police headquarters in the Alexanderplatz to see Detective Commissioner Dr. Braschwitz, in order to discuss with him further the question of releasing election material from Karl Liebknecht House. Shortly after 3 p.m., we went round to Karl Liebknecht House with some detective officers, and there a few small lots of posters, streamers, and other election material were released by the police and packed and sent out. When this had been completed, at 5:40 p.m., I took leave of the detective commissioner, arranged to meet some of our helpers next day in a neighboring restaurant to organize the dispatch of further material, and then telephoned to our fraction secretariat in the Reichstag, as I had to discuss some points in connection with the distribution of speakers for the last week of the election campaign. Following on this telephone conversation, I went direct to the Reichstag for the purpose stated, reaching there shortly before 6:30. There I met my colleague Ernst Torgler, who, as chairman of the official election committee of our party, was concerned in the allocation of party members of the Reichstag to the meetings which had been arranged. At about 7:15 p.m. I had settled the business I had come for, and Torgler asked me to visit a few minutes for him, as he was only waiting for a telephone call which would soon be through. Then we could go and have a meal together. I then told him of the constant difficulties which were being made over the release of election material from Karl Liebknecht House. We agreed that Torgler, as head of the party's Central Election Committee, should telephone to Dr. Dials, head of the political section of the Berlin police, to lodge a further protest against the withholding of election posters and other election material. This conversation with Dr. Dials took place at about 7:30 p.m. Following on this, I got myself put through to the assessor, who, as Dr. Dials' right-hand man, was responsible for handing over the material, and put my point of view as to the difficulties which were being created, also discussing what had to be done the following day, in connection with which I had already made a further appointment to meet the detective commissioner at Karl Liebknecht House. After this telephone conversation with police headquarters, Torgler had another telephone conversation, at about 7:45, with the lawyer Dr. Rosenfeld. Then, as the call from a party friend, which he had been expecting since 7 o'clock, still did not come through, he telephoned down to the porter at door 5, and asked him, in the event of a call coming through to him after 8, when the exchange in the Reichstag is closed, to call him down on the internal telephone from the fraction secretariat room. Meanwhile, the cloakroom attendant at the south door telephoned to ask whether Herr Torgler was now leaving, or whether his hat and coat should be brought up as usual to the secretariat room. Torgler asked for his things to be brought up to him, and this was done at about 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock the cloakroom and door 2 are closed. Then at last, at a couple minutes past 8, the call which we had been waiting for came through, and had to be dealt with by the porter at door 5, the only door still open. Torgler was called down on the house telephone, and naturally, having to come down from the 3rd floor and not wanting to keep his friend waiting unnecessarily, he lost no time over getting down. A few minutes later Torgler returned from the porter's office direct to the fraction room, and soon after that we put on our things, and together with the woman secretary of the fraction, left the Reichstag through door 5 at perhaps 8:15. So far from leaving the building in flight, as is alleged, it so happened that we left the Reichstag building that evening at a much slower pace than we had ever done before. The secretary of the fraction, who went out with us that night, was suffering from an inflamed vein, which made it difficult for her to walk, so that we went at a snail's pace. It was at this very slow pace that we walked to the Friedrichstrasse station, where the secretary left us, and went down to the underground. We went straight, that is, therefore, at about 8:30, to the Aschinger restaurant at the Friedrichstrasse station, where we had supper. There we met 3 other party friends, and stayed for some time talking to them. 2 of these friends left us after they had had a meal, somewhere between 9:30 and 9:45. At 10 o'clock there was a change of shifts for the waiters, so we paid our bills shortly before 10. It was already past 10 o'clock when the new waiter came to our table and, addressing me by name, said, "Herr Koenen, have you heard? The Reichstag is on fire." I was astounded, and replied, "Man, are you mad? It's quite impossible." He answered excitedly, "No, it's true. All the taxi drivers say so. You can ask them at the counter by the door. Thousands of people are already collected there." Thus it was that we came to learn of one of the most monstrous crimes in the history of the world. Signed, William Koenen. This affidavit exposes the 4th contradiction in the official reports. The message issued by the Preußische Präsident of March 1st, 1933, states that Torgler did not present himself at police headquarters, but that he was arrested. The deposition printed below, which was given on oath by the barrister Dr. Kurt Rosenfeld, who accompanied Torgler to police headquarters, shows that this statement is untrue. On the morning after the burning of the Reichstag, Herr Ernst Torgler rang me up on the telephone and asked me whether I was willing to go with him to police headquarters, where he intended to go in order to rebut the charges which had been made against him in connection with the Reichstag fire. I expressed my willingness to go with him, and at once telephoned to police headquarters to inform them that I should be coming at once with Torgler. If I remember rightly, I spoke to an official of the name of Heller, then drove to police headquarters in a car with Torgler, and asked to see Herr Heller, to whom I said, "This is Herr Torgler, and I must ask you to question him in connection with the charge that he is supposed to have had some sort of connection with the Reichstag fire." The news that Torgler had presented himself voluntarily to be interrogated brought several police officers into the room where I was, asking, "Is it true that Torgler has come of his own accord?" Herr Heller then went with Herr Torgler into another room, while I waited in the anteroom. After a long time Herr Torgler came out of the room again, and we waited together until Herr Heller called us both into another room, and in my presence declared that Torgler was under arrest. Signed, Kurt Rosenfeld. This is the fifth contradiction. The Preußisch-Präsident of March 1st reported that Deputy Torgler had been several hours in company with the incendiary in the Reichstag building, and that he had also been in the company of other persons implicated in the fire. If Torgler had really been an accomplice, the most elementary common sense would have prevented him from showing himself in public with van der Lubbe. This is the sixth contradiction. The statement issued by the official Preußisch-Präsident on March 1st asserts that the Communist deputies of the Reichstag were familiar with the Reichstag building and with the duty arrangements of the staff. In fact, the Communist deputies of the Reichstag were not familiar with the duty arrangements of the staff, as they had no seat on the Presidium of the Reichstag and were moreover excluded from all committees which dealt with the administration of the Reichstag building. And, moreover, as we shall show, on the day of the burning of the Reichstag, the duty arrangements of the staff had been altered by the National Socialist House Inspector, so that although Goering, President of the Reichstag, was in a position to know about this alteration, the Communist deputies could not have known of it. This is the seventh contradiction. Van der Lubbe not a communist. The official President's messages of February 28th state that van der Lubbe stated that he was a member of the Dutch Communist Party. The version broadcast on the wireless, that van der Lubbe had had on him a membership card of the Dutch Communist Party, was dropped even on the night of the Reichstag fire because it was too incredible. The first journalist who interviewed van der Lubbe after the burning of the Reichstag was the reporter of the Amsterdam paper De Telegraaf, whose message was published in his paper on March 2nd. Marinus tells me that for some years now he's not been a member of any party. He is not a convinced communist. In fact, Marinus van der Lubbe resigned from the Young Communist League of Leiden in April 1931, in order to forestall his expulsion. This is the eighth contradiction. The Wolf Telegraph Bureau reported from Amsterdam on March 2nd. The attempt made by the Dutch Communists to repudiate van der Lubbe cannot succeed, for police headquarters in The Hague have information that Lubbe was not expelled but merely removed from the front line and given the cold shoulder because his radical ideas did not suit the cautious party leadership in Holland. The German authorities wanted to create the impression that a communist who had been given the cold shoulder by the Dutch Communist Party. In reality, van der Lubbe had not been a member of the Young Communist League since April 1931, was used by the Germanist Communist Party for terrorist acts. Was it not the National Socialists who had been for years asserting that the closest links existed between the Communist parties, which are all only sections of the Communist International? How then can it be imagined that a Dutch communist who had been given the cold shoulder would be received by the German communist leaders with open arms and entrusted with the most confidential work? That is the ninth contradiction. The same report by the Wolf Telegraph Bureau goes on to say, as recently as December 22, 1932, Lubbe took part in a meeting of taxi drivers in The Hague who were on strike and made a long communist speech. This information given by the Dutch police is indeed extremely important in its bearing on the Reichstag fire, In the meeting of taxi drivers, van der Lubbe did not make a communist speech, but, as he had frequently done before, attacked the Dutch Communist Party. We have definite evidence of this in a signed statement made by A. Terro, a member of the staff of the Tribune, and countersigned by a number of other persons present at the meeting. This is the 10th contradiction. The statement made by the chief of the political police on March 4th asserted that van der Lubbe knew German. Statements by everyone who knew him, and also the statements made by the journalist who visited him in prison and spoke to him, are all unanimous that van der Lubbe only speaks broken German. The local Anzeiger of February 28th states that van der Lubbe was interrogated with the aid of an interpreter. This is the 11th contradiction. The same statement made by the chief of the political police says, van der Lubbe is also known to the police as a communist agitator. On April 28, 1931, he was arrested by the police in Kronau in Westphalia for selling postcards of communist tendency. In actual fact, van der Lubbe did sell postcards at Gronau in Westphalia. They were postcards of himself and his friend Hovelda. The postcards bear the following text in 4 languages: Workers' Sports and Study Tour of Marinus van der Lubbe and H. Hovelda through Europe and the Soviet Union. Start of the tour from Leiden, April 14, 1931. There is not another word on the card, not the slightest indication of communist agitation. Van der Lubbe was arrested merely because he had no license to sell the cards on the street. This is the 12th contradiction. The chief of the Berlin political police further stated, he, van der Lubbe, in his examination, only admitted the true facts of the case insofar as he was confronted with witnesses. A few lines lower down, the same report says, he, van der Lubbe, confessed every detail. No names of eyewitnesses of the act of incendiarism have been given by the Hitler government. Even the official Preußische Präsident did not assert that van der Lubbe had been seen setting fire to the Reichstag by the police or anyone else. And if this is so, then, according to the statement issued by the chief of the political police, he did not make any confession. On the other hand, the same police official states that van der Lubbe confessed every detail. This is the 13th contradiction. The so-called national press, which is inspired by the police, announced the day after the Reichstag fire that van der Lubbe had been in Moscow and had been trained there. In reality, van der Lubbe had never been in the Soviet Union. He went direct from Leiden to Germany. This is the 14th contradiction. Van der Lubbe left Leiden between the 13th and the 15th of February. According to a statement published in the Vossische Zeitung of March 2, 1933, he spent the night of the 17th through the 18th of February in a hostel at Glindau near Werden. On February 18th, he went on foot to Berlin. In an interview which the Criminal Commissioner Heise gave to the Dutch press on March 13th, he stated that van der Lubbe had made the acquaintance of communists at labor exchanges, and through them was brought into the Communist Action Committee. Van der Lubbe did not arrive in Berlin until the evening of Saturday, February 18th at the earliest. On the Sunday following, February 19th, the labor exchanges were closed. If the statement made by the police is correct, therefore, he could not have made the acquaintance of communists at a labor exchange before Monday, February 20th, at the earliest. The reader must imagine for himself. A Dutchman, speaking broken German, without any transfer papers from the Dutch Communist Party, on February 20th makes the acquaintance of communists at a labor exchange in Berlin, is brought by them into contact with the leaders of the party, and commissioned by them to set fire to the Reichstag on February 27th. This is the 15th contradiction. A statement issued by the official Preußische Präsident of March 1st says, "The arrested man has been continuously present at the meetings of the Communist Action Committee and was drawn in to carry out this act of incendiarism." On March 3rd, the Central Committee of the German Communist Party made the following statement in reply. Of course, no meetings of any Communist Action Committee have been held in the Reichstag or elsewhere at which the man arrested in the Reichstag, van der Lubbe, was present. In the first place, no Communist Action Committee exists, but only the Central Committee of the German Communist Party and its political bureau. In the second place, no individuals take part in meetings of the Communist Party or of any of its units who are not members of either the German Communist Party or of some other section of the Comintern. This reply to Goering's assertions reveals the 16th contradiction. Catacombs in Karl Liebknecht House. A statement issued by the official Preußische Pressedienst on February 28, 1933, says, among the 100 centners of material which the police discovered in their search of the Karl Liebknecht house were instructions for the carrying out of the Communist terror on the Bolshevik model. According to these instructions, government buildings, museums, mansions, and essential plant were to be burnt down. The further direction is given that in riots and conflicts, women and children are to be put in front of the terrorist troops. If possible, the wives and children of police officials. The discovery of this material has checked the systematic carrying through of the Bolshevik Revolution. The Reichstag deputy Wilhelm Koenen, who was constantly working in the Karl Liebknecht house during the last few days of February, as a leading official of the Communist Party, describes the searches in Karl Liebknecht house as follows. In the forenoon of February 17th, a gigantic crowd of detective officers, accompanied by several companies of ordinary police, rushed into the building and occupied every room. Every corner, every cupboard was thoroughly searched. They had taken the precaution of bringing skilled workers with them to take to pieces the desks, for which there were no keys. All the cellars, too, were carefully searched. In the cellars, as usual, there was only the material which had been left over from various campaigns, or had been returned to the office in the course of years. In the basement rooms there were also supplies of paper and bookshop stocks. On that occasion the police inspector still considered it necessary, at my request, to show me any papers confiscated as suspicious, and to state that they were confiscated or to give me a receipt for them. Among the papers seized in the course of this exhaustive search, which lasted many hours, there was neither the book The Art of Armed Insurrection nor any other so-called seditious publication. Nor was there any mention of these in the police reports issued immediately after the raid. It was only a week later, on February 24th, although I had been almost every day with police inspectors in the Karl Liebknecht house in connection with getting out election material, that police headquarters suddenly asserted that in the course of a new search in the so-called catacombs seditious material had been found, including the book The Art of Armed Insurrection. This alleged new search, if it took place at all, must have been carried out without any civilian witnesses, and without any representative of the people concerned being present. This is all the more significant as I had been practically every day in the Karl Liebknecht house negotiating with police inspectors to recover election material, paper, books, and so forth, and getting them dispatched. Although I was therefore available every day, I was neither summoned nor even informed when the alleged discovery was made. It would have been particularly easy to inform me of it, as I was there on the 24th, on Saturday the 25th, and again on Monday the 27th, and was talking to detectives and inspectors in connection with the delivery of the material recovered from the police. On February 25th, after the report of the passages, vaults, and catacombs had already appeared in heavy type in the great press, when I had finished with the inspector in charge in connection with the release of election material, I asked him where the catacombs were. A number of comrades who were helping with the dispatch of the election material were also present. He then, to our surprise, pointed to a trap door about a yard wide in a room on the ground floor, which was used as a porter's office. The trap door was raised so that we could see a ladder leading down into the basement. A comrade who had worked in the building for many years and knew it well said, "Man, that's the trap door to our old beer cellar." We all laughed and asked the same question. Is that supposed to be the catacombs? The inspector answered only with a rather embarrassed nod. That part of the building used to be an inn. The explanation of the passages through which people were supposed to be able to get away to other streets is equally simple. Karl Liebknecht House is a corner house, which as an office building for commercial undertakings had storerooms and working rooms in the basement, and these were described by Goering's police as vaults, passages, and catacombs. These two statements expose the 17th contradiction in the official reports. Signal for civil war, the Preußische Präsidentei announced on February 28th. The burning of the Reichstag was to be the signal for a bloody insurrection and civil war. Looting on a large scale had been organized for Tuesday in Berlin. It has been ascertained that today was to have seen throughout Germany terrorist acts against individual persons, against private property, and against the life and limb of the peaceful population, and also the beginning of general civil war. The Vossische Zeitung of March 4, 1933 reported, "The work of the police has up to the present prevented the material being put into the hands of every communist. It has only got into the hands of a few functionaries in secret communications." The last search of Karl Liebknecht House took place on February 24th. It was on this occasion that the terrorist material is alleged to have been found. The political police state that the instructions for the terror did not reach all communists, but were only known to a few functionaries, so that the German Communist Party would have had to circulate through every area in Germany in the 3 days between February 24th and 27th, the materials stored in the Karl Liebknecht House. Secondly, within the same 3 days, it would have had to get together the special groups who were to carry out the terrorist acts. Thirdly, it would have had to instruct and train these groups to carry out the terrorist acts. And fourthly, it would have had to prepare and organize the rest of the members for the civil war, which was to be unleashed through these terrorist acts. In February 1933, the German Communist Party had over 300,000 members, distributed all over Germany. The party would have had to work miracles to organize within 3 days for the carrying through of all the plans attributed to it by the official statements. This is the 18th contradiction. The incriminating material has not been produced. During the evening of March 1st, the official Preußische Präsidentei issued the following announcement. The Prussian Ministry of the Interior states, in connection with the decree issued by the Reich government against the communist danger, dated February 28th, that particularly heavy penalties have been imposed for a number of crimes, because of the grave and acute danger which has been fully established, and of the inhuman and carefully prepared system of unrestricted communist terror. Germany was to have been thrown into the chaos of Bolshevism. The assassination of individual leaders of the nation and of the state, outrages against essential services and public persons, the seizure as hostages of the wives and children of prominent men, were to produce fear and dismay among the nation, and cripple any attempt at resistance on the part of the citizens. The Reich Commissioner for the Prussian Ministry of the Interior, Minister Goering, will in the very near future make public the documents which prove the necessity of all the measures which have been taken. The enormous amount of material is being sifted once again, and a final examination of it is being made with a view to ensuring that the security of the state cannot be further endangered by its publication. Up to the present time, the documents have not been published. This is the 19th contradiction. Goering denies his own statement. On March 2, 1933, the Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung and the Tägliche Rundschau published the following messages from the official Preußische Präsidentei. In certain foreign newspapers, the slanderous assertion, emanating from German Marxist circles, is being circulated that the fire in the Reichstag building was organized not by communists, but from the National Socialist side. The originators of this slander have already been arrested, and will be brought to due punishment as soon as the investigation has been completed. Among other things, it is asserted that the Dutch communist who was arrested is in reality an agent provocateur, and was induced to carry out the act of incendiarism by leading National Socialists. This is supposed to be proved by the fact that the criminal had used his coat and shirt as inflammable material, but had not even removed the communist documents and his passports which were found on him. Significance is further attached to the fact that the police authorities have not published the photograph of the incendiary and the documents found on him, and have also offered no reward for persons who could give further information about the criminal and establish his connections with communist and social democratic politicians. This unusual procedure in an important criminal case is supposed to be evidence that the authorities are hindering the elucidation of the crime, in order to be able to use a National Socialist act of provocation as a pretext for anti-Marxist measures. In reply to this, it is stated from official sources that these slanderous arguments are of course devoid of any basis. The photographs of the criminal and of the documents found on him have not yet been published, purely in the interest of the investigation. Publication will take place in the course of today. Moreover, the Berlin correspondents of foreign newspapers can obtain the photographic reproductions in the course of today from the IA department at police headquarters. The photograph of the criminal will also be handed today to the Dutch police, in order to confirm the criminal's identity. This will remove the possibility of further slanders. A specific warning is issued against the dissemination of such slanders. But before the other German papers could publish this announcement, its publication was forbidden. Goering instructed the Wolf Bureau to circulate a statement that the Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung and the Tägliche Rundschau had been taken in by a communist forgery. Apparently, Goering wanted to make people believe that anyone can simply ring up a newspaper and say, "Preußische Präsident speaking," and then secure publicity for any kind of story. In reality, telephone messages from press agencies to newspapers are very strictly controlled. Before accepting any message, the editorial stenographer first asks for confirmation from the control. Goering's dementi cannot cause any doubt as to the fact that at first he intended, through the Preußische Präsidente, to bluff the world, and then later, too late, realized the danger of the message and tried to hold it back. This is the 20th contradiction. End of Chapter 4, Part 2. Chapter 4, Part 3 of the Brown Book of the Hitler Terror. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lawrence Trask, Mount Vernon, Ohio. InterfaceAudio.com. Brown Book of the Hitler Terror by Lord Marley. Chapter 4, Part 3. The Hunt for Accomplices. The Conti Service of the official Wolf Telegraph Bureau announced on March 4, 1933, that the Communist Reichstag deputy Schumann, at a Communist election meeting at Garen, Thuringia, on February 24th, foretold the burning of the Reichstag building. Schumann's actual words are reported to have been, "This evening the Reichstag will be in flames, but that makes no difference. If this dance hall is burnt down, then we will get a swung floor." The Vossische Zeitung of March 5, 1933 states, "A report was sent out from Thuringia and further broadcast by wireless to the effect that the district authorities in Arnstadt in Thuringia were in possession of a report relating to a communist election meeting held at Garen on the evening of the wicked act of arson in the building of the German Reichstag. That the local police official who was present at the meeting recorded in his report a statement made by the speaker, the Communist Reichstag deputy Schumann, in which the fire in the Reichstag was foretold in advance, Investigations since made have, however, as the Thüringer Allgemeine Zeitung now states, shown that there is a wireless apparatus in the restaurant where the meeting was held, and that the landlord, on the basis of the radio announcement, had sent to tell the speaker in the course of his speech that the Reichstag was on fire. It has been established that the police officer concerned made an error of 1 hour in his report, and that Schumann only began his speech at about 10:15 p.m. It can therefore be taken for granted that he had already heard of the radio announcement that the Reichstag was on fire. This is the 21st contradiction. On March 7, 1933, the Vossische Zeitung stated on the basis of information received from the police: Duren 6-3. In the German village of Lammerdorf, near the Belgian frontier, a Russian emigrant was arrested yesterday evening on suspicion of having been concerned in the burning of the Reichstag. Shortly before his arrest, he had dispatched a telegram from a Belgian post office to Paris, the content of which cannot as yet be disclosed. On being sent back across the frontier by Belgian frontier guards, he was arrested on this side of the frontier. He admitted during his interrogation that he came originally from Russia and had been living for some time in Berlin. He had severe burns on his arms and legs. The mysterious foreigner was today handed over to the criminal authorities. He obstinately refuses to say anything more regarding his activities in the capital of the Reich, and up to the present has not even given his name. On March 8, 1933, the Vossische Zeitung printed a statement received from the authorities at Aix-la-Chapelle. Not an accomplice of the Reichstag incendiary. The authorities of Aix-la-Chapelle state that the Russian citizen who was arrested near Friemshaus as an incendiary, as investigations have shown, cannot be implicated. The man concerned has been active as a journalist in the Communist Party. For this reason he was expelled from the country a year ago, but there is no further evidence against him. His expulsion has been carried out. This is the 22nd contradiction. Did van der Lubbe alone start the fire? Early in March, the Hitler government sent Heißig, a detective commissioner, to Leiden to make investigations regarding van der Lubbe's antecedents. Heißig gave an interview to representatives of the Dutch press, which was published in a number of papers on March 14th. This contains the following: As for the important questions whether Lubbe had assistants or accomplices, it is probable that he alone started the fire, but that the preparatory measures had been carried out by accomplices. This statement absolutely contradicts the official statement made on March 1st, that the simultaneous lighting of the fire at so many points in the gigantic building must have required at least 10 persons. The judge in charge of the investigation, Voigt, therefore hastened to deny on March 15th the statement made by Heißig. A report has been published in a number of papers that van der Lubbe started the fire in the Reichstag by himself. This is not correct. The investigation conducted by the court has given good reason to believe that van der Lubbe did not commit the crime on his own initiative. In the interests of the investigation, details cannot at present be given. This is the 23rd contradiction. Lubbe's connections with the Social Democrats. The official Preußische Pressedienst of February 28th gave the information that in his confession van der Lubbe had admitted to connections with the Social Democratic Party. On February 28th, the executive of the Social Democratic Party issued a statement in the following terms: During the night of the 27th-28th February, the whole Social Democratic press of Prussia was prohibited for 14 days. The prohibition is based on the statement that an arrested man has confessed that he started the fire in the Reichstag building and had previously had a certain connection with the Social Democratic Party. The suggestion that the Social Democratic Party would have anything to do with people who set fire to the Reichstag is repudiated by the party. This statement issued by the executive of the Social Democratic Party was confirmed by a statement made by the examining magistrate, Judge Voigt, which was published on March 22, 1933. The investigation has so far shown that the Dutch communist van der Lubbe, who was arrested as the person who set fire to the Reichstag building, was in communication immediately before the fire, not only with German communists, but also with foreign communists, including some who had been condemned to death or to long terms of penal servitude in connection with the explosion in the Sofia Cathedral in 1925. The persons concerned are now under arrest. The investigation has not produced the slightest grounds for believing that non-communist circles had any connection with the burning of the Reichstag. On February 27th, van der Lubbe is said to have admitted connections with the Social Democrats. On March 22nd, there were not the slightest grounds for believing this assertion. This is the 24th contradiction. Van der Lubbe and the Bulgarians. In the statement referred to above, Judge Voigt declares that van der Lubbe had connections with the people responsible for the Sofia Cathedral explosion. Van der Lubbe had therefore not only performed the miracle of establishing, within 7 days, connections with the leaders of the German Communist Party, through communists whom he got to know by accident at a labor exchange. He also succeeded, within these 7 days, in getting into touch with Bulgarians who are said to have been responsible for the Sofia Cathedral explosion. This is the 25th contradiction. The Bulgarians who were arrested and charged with complicity in the burning of the Reichstag are Dimitrov, Popov, and Tanev. George Dimitrov was one of the theoretical leaders of the Bulgarian Communist Party. In 1923 he took part in the rising of the Bulgarian workers, and in 1924 he was sentenced in contumaciam to 15 years hard labor. He has not been in Bulgaria since 1923. He had no part whatever in the Sofia Cathedral explosion. Bourgeois Popov emigrated to Yugoslavia in 1924, and only returned to Bulgaria at the end of 1930. He also was not concerned in the Sofia Cathedral explosion of 1925. The third arrested Bulgarian, Tanev, is merely a worker, who was not in any way concerned in the Sofia Cathedral explosion. The aim of the assertion that the arrested Bulgarians had blown up the Sofia Cathedral is quite clear. The Hitler government hoped to produce the impression that the burning of the Reichstag was an international communist plot. This is the 26th contradiction. The judge in charge of the investigation asserted that Dimitrov had been seen with van der Lubbe at 3 p.m. on February 26th in a restaurant in the Düsseldorferstrasse. The judge also produced a witness who swore that he had seen van der Lubbe with Dimitrov on that date. But the witness disappeared into oblivion shortly afterwards, for Dimitrov was able to prove that on February 26th he had not been in Berlin at all, but in Munich. This is the 27th contradiction. No material for a great communist trial. On March 27th, Judge Voigt stated that a criminal warrant had so far been issued only against van der Lubbe. But on April 3rd he caused a statement to be circulated that in all 5 warrants had been issued in connection with the burning of the Reichstag, for van der Lubbe, 3 Bulgarian communists, and the Communist Reichstag deputy, Torgler. Torgler was arrested on February 28th, the Bulgarians on March 3rd. Up to March 27th, that is to say during the period when the main inquiries were being made, no warrants had been issued for Torgler and the Bulgarians. The warrants were issued only when the announcement that the only criminal warrant issued was for van der Lubbe had created a sensation in the press of the world. This is the 28th contradiction. Judge Voigt's statement of April 3rd says that for the time being Only warrants for protective arrest have been issued in respect of a few other suspected persons. On June 2nd it was officially announced that the preliminary investigation conducted by Judge Voigt against the accused van der Lubbe, Torgler, Dimitrov, Popov, and Tanev on charges of setting fire to the Reichstag and high treason was concluded on June 1st. All the documents have now been sent to the Reich Public Prosecutor at Leipzig. On April 3rd there were still a few other suspected persons. On June 1st they are no longer there. This is the 29th contradiction. On April 22nd, Judge Voigt authorized the following official statement with regard to the progress of the investigation. The Supreme Court proposes to combine the investigation in the many pending cases of high treason against members of the Communist Party into one single inquiry on a large scale. It is expected that the investigations will be concluded in 8 to 10 weeks, so that then all the cases of high treason can be dealt with together by the Supreme Court. The cases concerned are all those arising in connection with the change of government in Germany, that is to say, all crimes during the course of January and February. This will also include the proceedings connected with the act of incendiarism in the Reichstag. This case has so far not made very rapid progress, owing to the fact that the accused, and particularly the Bulgarians, refused to make any statement. The grounds for suspicion of complicity against the Reichstag deputy Torgler have been more securely established. A month later, on May 25th, there was no longer any talk of a great communist trial. The Hitler government was forced to issue, through a parliamentary news bureau, the news that the trial in connection with the act of incendiarism in the Reichstag will be associated with other cases against communist leaders in a great communist trial, as has been suggested, is not to be expected. The trial of van der Lubbe and his accomplices will come before the Supreme Court as soon as the necessary preliminary labors have been concluded. This is the 30th contradiction. The Völkischer Beobachter, Hitler's official organ, published the following statement on March 3rd as coming from an official source. The chief of the press section of the National Socialist fraction in the Reichstag discovered a missing pane of the glass roof over the room of the Communist deputy Torgler, and after further search discovered a long ladder above it, lying against the window of a Communist deputy's room in the second upper story. Detective inspectors immediately instituted a thorough search, for it was here that the incendiaries must have come down before the crime, or got up again after the crime. On March 1st, Goering had declared that the incendiaries had got away through the underground passage, which connects the Reichstag building with Goering's house. This declaration of his confirmed what many people thought, that the Reichstag incendiaries had made their way into the Reichstag through his house, and had escaped through his house. In order to weaken the overwhelming impression caused by Goering's declaration, the chief of the press section of the Nazi fraction in the Reichstag was sent to discover a missing pane and a ladder. The detective force, after 3 days' thorough search, had failed to see what the sharp eyes of the leader of the press section discovered in a moment. This is the 31st contradiction. Van der Lubbe confesses what is required. Dr. Oberfohren stated in his memorandum that Goebbels' plan was to start a series of incendiary acts, which were to culminate in the burning of the Reichstag. For incendiary acts, incendiaries are necessary. Van der Lubbe confesses that he set fire to the Reichstag. Van der Lubbe confesses that on February 25th he tried to set fire to the Berliner Schloss. In connection with this, the press of February 27th reported, "It has only now become known that a small fire broke out on Saturday in an office room on the 5th floor of the Berliner Schloss, which was quickly put out by a fireman stationed on the premises. The origin of the fire is not yet fully explained, but it is thought to have been an act of incendiarism." An hour before the fire started, the caretaker had started his round through the Schloss, and had even passed through that room. At the time there was nothing suspicious to be seen. Soon afterwards the room was in flames. Investigation showed that there was a burning firelighter on the window sill, and another under the window, and also on the steam pipes. The police investigation has not yet been concluded. Van der Lubbe confesses that on February 25th he tried to start a fire in the welfare office in Neukölln. Van der Lubbe confesses that on February 25th he made an attempt to start a fire in the Berlin town hall. This Van der Lubbe is a real child of the devil. To start fires on one day in 3 different places in Berlin. And he is a man who only speaks German brokenly. He had only arrived in Berlin on February 18th, 1933. 7 days later he had sufficient knowledge of the place to start fires in the Schloss, in the town hall, and in the welfare office. He only required 9 days to learn enough about the Reichstag to enable him to walk in and out as if it were his own house. Van der Lubbe had to appear as a dyed-in-the-blood communist. Such a communist, as conceived by Dr. Goebbels, must have a forged passport. Consequently, Van der Lubbe must make some alteration in his name on the passport. The passport was forged by putting 2 dots over the U, changing it into a U. Van der Lubbe was only too willing to take communist leaflets into the Reichstag with him. Certainly, no criminal has ever met the police so completely equipped with credentials. A talk with Torgler the day before the Reichstag fire. As chairman of the communist fraction in the Reichstag, Ernst Torgler was often called upon to answer enquiries from the press and from journalists. At a press conference on February 24th, he told the journalists present that the Communists had information of an act of provocation planned by the Nazis. He stated that among other plans there was talk of staging an attempt to assassinate Hitler. The whole of the foreign press and a section of the German press published Torgler's statement. Shortly after this conference, the parliamentary correspondent of the Vossische Zeitung, Adolf Philippsborn, arranged an interview with Torgler, and an account of this interview written by Philippsborn was published in the Gegenangriff of July 1, 1933. It runs as follows. As a parliamentary journalist, I have for many years been in contact with deputies belonging to all parties in the Reichstag. It so chanced that I had arranged an interview with Torgler on February 26, 24 hours before the Reichstag fire. Torgler came with his daughter, who is 11 years of age. As the head of his party fraction, I showed him some material on the secret plans of the National Socialists. We then talked for about 2 hours about the whole political situation. I have never been a sympathizer with the Communist Party, and I referred to a number of weaknesses of the party. Torgler admitted some of the points, but energetically defended the general standpoint of his political friends. Finally, I put the following question to him. There is a rumor going about that the Communists propose to take some action against the Nazi government before the Reichstag elections, March 5th. Is this true? Torgler: that is nonsense. The government is only waiting for an opportunity to prohibit the Communist Party. Will the Communist leaders call a strike? Torgler: of course we are calling for a political mass strike as a means of struggle against fascist acts of violence. But we know that this can only be successful if the trade unions withdraw their opposition and line up with us in a fighting front. Can this interview then be summed up by saying that the Communist Party does not intend to take any action which could give the Nazi government the occasion for an offensive against the Marxist working class? Torgler, emphatically and with conviction: yes, that is the position. We Communists know that by ourselves we are too weak for the fight. We know that Hitler, Goering and his colleagues are only waiting for some pretext which will give them the opportunity to prohibit the Communist Party and cancel the mandates of party deputies elected to the Reichstag. We know that we are shadowed by spies and that our telephone conversations are listened to. We are not going to run into the trap these gentlemen have prepared for us." On the evening following this conversation the Reichstag was in flames, and a few hours later Torgler had been arrested as the criminal. I then had the conviction, and still have it, that Torgler told me the absolute truth, and for that reason, although I am an opponent of communism, I am prepared to say it to anyone, including Herr Goering, who knows it better than I do, and to the judges at the trial. Hands off Ernst Torgler. He is not guilty. The proof of the Nazis' guilt. The contradictions in which the Hitler government became entangled in its accounts of the Reichstag fire are by themselves enough to show who were the real incendiaries. But apart from these contradictions, there is direct evidence that the National Socialists were guilty of this act of incendiarism. We do not propose to print here all the evidence which we have at our disposal, but only the most important and striking parts of it. The fire in the German Reichstag was discovered at 9:15. The mass arrests in Berlin began soon after midnight. Almost all the warrants were accompanied with photographs of the accused, and the date of issue was inserted in ink. On February 28th, approximately 1,500 persons were arrested in Berlin alone. Is it possible to fill out 1,500 warrants, sign them, and in the majority of cases attach photographs to them, in 3 hours? Information which we have received from dismissed police officials provides the explanation of this promptness. The warrants were got ready during the days immediately preceding the burning of the Reichstag. Only the date was not filled in. By the morning of February 27th, all the warrants were ready. They were signed before the date was filled in. On February 22nd, the Prussian government decided to strengthen the police with auxiliary police. Only members of the so-called national associations, that is, of the National Socialist storm troops and of the Stahlhelm, were allowed to join the auxiliary police. While the control of the auxiliary police was left in the hands of the local authorities, the Minister of the Interior, Goering, reserved to himself the right to control them in Berlin itself. The decision was made public on February 27th, the date of the Reichstag fire. In the first official announcement of the Reichstag fire, Goering triumphantly stated that the organization of the auxiliary police, for which he was responsible, had proved to be justified and necessary. The National Socialist leaders and ministers were not content with setting up the auxiliary police. On February 27th, the whole of the storm troop forces in Berlin were confined to their quarters in barracks. A member of the storm troops, who left Germany at the end of March, gave the following information to the Paris Intransigent. At noon on February 27th, we received the orders to remain in our quarters until further notice. We were strictly forbidden to show ourselves in groups in the streets. Only our collectors were allowed out with their collecting boxes, and a few others were sent on special errands. We did not know what was in the wind, and we waited until suddenly at 10 o'clock in the evening the order came. All at the double to the Brandenburger Tor. Leave your weapons. You are wanted for cordon duty. The Reichstag is on fire. The Berlin leader Ernst collected a few of us in the tavern at the corner of the Wilhelmstrasse and the Dorotheenstrasse. He instructed us to go to various parts of town and to spread in the beer houses and at the street corners the story that the Communists had set fire to the Reichstag, that definite evidence had been found. In short, the whole story as it appeared in the press the following day. At that time it was not yet known that van der Lubbe was a Dutchman, and that Deputy Torgler had been the last to leave the Reichstag. This was all told us as an absolute fact, and indeed with such definiteness that we all felt violently angry with the incendiaries. We rushed out, and carried out our tasks with the greatest zeal. The more often I told the story, the more detailed it became, and soon I felt as I had been an eyewitness of the arson. Group leader Ernst has a high position in the Hitler hierarchy, but it requires more than a group leader's intellectual powers to know, by a few minutes after 10 p.m. that Torgler had been the last to leave the Reichstag. Group leader Ernst was privy to the plan of Goebbels and Goering. He was allocated the special task of transforming the storm-troop men into heralds to spread the story of the communist incendiaries. Hitler betrays himself. On February 27, 1933, fire broke out in the German Reichstag. On February 27, 1933, although the elections campaign was at its height, the most important National Socialist leaders were in Berlin. On February 27th, Hitler did not speak at any meeting. On February 27th, Goebbels did not speak at any meeting. They were in Berlin with Goering. None of the three had any meeting or any work to do that night. A few minutes after it became known that the Reichstag was on fire, Goering made his appearance on the scene, and Hitler and Goebbels were there a few minutes later. Sefton Delmer, the Berlin correspondent of the Daily Express, one of the few English papers to back Hitler, was in their company, and the report he sent to the Daily Express is more damaging than any published by papers hostile to Hitler. Sefton Delmer describes the scene at the Reichstag, perhaps 20 to 30 minutes after the fire had been discovered. Hitler is reported as having turned to von Papen and said, "This is a God-given signal. If this fire, as I believe, turns out to be the handiwork of communists, then there is nothing that shall stop us now crushing out this murder pest with an iron fist." Then, turning to Sefton Delmer, he said, "You are witnessing the beginning of a great new epoch in German history. This fire is the beginning." The Chancellor of the Third Reich spoke these words at a time when the guilt of the Communists could not have been established, when van der Lubbe was only just being interrogated with the help of an interpreter. According to unanimous press reports, the interrogation of van der Lubbe, which began immediately after his arrest, continued into the early hours of the morning. Van der Lubbe was arrested at about 9:20 p.m. At the time when Hitler spoke the words quoted above, van der Lubbe could not have made his comprehensive confession, which might have served Hitler as the ground for his accusations against the Communists. Hitler's lack of self-control made him put the blame on the Communists a little too early. He did not wait for his cue. An ally charges the Nazis with the act of arson. The Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung, the organ of heavy industry, had been demanding since 1930 that Hitler should be entrusted with the government. Heavy industry was then trying to make the German nationalists believe that Hitler would be content to share power with them. The first weeks of the national government's existence brought out the sharp contradictions within the coalition government. Oberfohren's memorandum shows these contradictions clearly. The Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung tried to strengthen the position of the German nationalists. In the early stages it spared no criticism of the national government, and soon after the Reichstag fire, when the National Socialists became preponderant in the coalition government, it even went so far as to assert that Goering's statements were untrue, and to express doubts of the guilt of the Communists. On March 2nd the following appeared in the paper: "From a political standpoint there is only one quite incomprehensible point about the Reichstag fire: that a Communist could have been found who was so foolish as to commit the crime. Apart from a few speeches, newspaper articles and proposals put forward, up to now we have seen very little of any united front between the Communists and the Social Democrats. It is extremely improbable that such a united front could have been widened out to achieve an act of incendiarism in the German Reichstag. We fear that closer examination of the presuppositions for the well-known statement made by the Minister of the Interior will show that the charge he made cannot be maintained. If that is the case, it would have been better not to have raised it." This is not from a Marxist journal, but from the Journal of Heavy Industry. A few months after the Reichstag fire, the Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung was brought into conformity. Its chief editor was removed, not before Hugenberg also sank into the background. But though the article failed to prevent the breakup of the German Nationalist Party, it is nevertheless significant that an ally of Hitler should expose Goering's lie and cast doubt on the guilt of the Communists. Why did Goering leave the Reichstag unprotected? The messages issued by the official Preußische Präsidentschaftsdienst on February 28th stated that among the material found in Karl Liebknecht House there were instructions for setting fire to the Reichstag. The search of Karl Liebknecht House took place on February 24th. Already on February 24th and 25th, the whole of the bourgeois press was in an uproar over the alleged murderous plans of the Communists. The police president of Berlin made a report to Goering on February 26th on the material alleged to have been found in the catacombs of Karl Liebknecht House. As Minister of the Interior, Goering was in control of the Prussian police. As president of the Reichstag, Goering was in control of the Reichstag building. There was no one else in such a position as he was in to protect the Reichstag against any plot. There was no one whose duty to do this was greater than his. Goering neither called on the police to protect the Reichstag, nor did he take any protective measures within the Reichstag itself. If the material alleged to have been found was real, then at the very least Herr Goering was guilty of abetting the crime. The only conclusions that can be drawn from the fact that the document alleged to have been found in the Karl Liebknecht House have not yet been published, as also from the fact that Goering took no steps to protect the Reichstag, is that the material from the Karl Liebknecht House existed only in the reports in the official Preußische Präsidentschaftsdienst. The Communists neither intended nor did they make any preparations to set fire to the Reichstag. The incendiaries were National Socialists. Goering sends home the Reichstag officials. Goering not only took no steps to protect the Reichstag building, he also saw to it that the Reichstag officials left the Reichstag before the normal time for finishing duty. On February 27th, the National Socialist inspector of the building released the officials on duty at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The staff told him that it was contrary to the terms of their employment to leave before the end of their spell of duty. The National Socialist inspector told them to go off duty, as there was nothing to do. Early in March, the foreign press published the information that the staff of the Reichstag had been released from their duties at an early hour on February 27th. The Hitler government has not dared to deny this. Fire Brigade Director puts the blame on Goering. On March 24th, the surprising announcement was made that the Chief Fire Brigade Director of Berlin, Gempp, had been provisionally granted leave of absence, as he had tolerated communist intrigues in the service. The communist intrigues which Gempp was supposed to have tolerated consisted in the fact that in a conference with the inspectors and men of the fire brigade he had made statements in connection with the Reichstag fire, which threw a curious light on Goering's attitude at the scene of the fire. Gemp's statements concern the three following essential points. In a conference with his inspectors and officers shortly before his dismissal, Herr Gempp complained that the fire brigade had been summoned too late. This was the only explanation of why a storm troop detachment, some 20 men strong, was already on the scene of the fire by the time that the fire brigade at last appeared. Herr Gempp complained further that the Minister of the Interior, Goering, had expressly forbidden him to circulate a general call, and thereby to summon stronger forces to fight the fire. Finally, Herr Gempp had noticed that in the parts of the Reichstag building which were not destroyed, there were great masses of unused incendiary material lying about. In fact, in various rooms and under and in cupboards, etc., there was material which would have completely filled a lorry. The above report was published in the Saarbrücker Volksstimme of April 25, 1933, and thence found its way into the press of the world. Goering did not reply to the report published by the Saarbrücker Volksstimme, not even by denying that the report was true. He used it as an opportunity of accusing Gempp of disloyalty. The Deutsche Allegheny Zeitung of April 29, 1933, reports how Goering reacted to the disclosure made by the Volksstimme. Disciplinary action against Director Gempp. We have received the following from Commissioner Dr. Lippert. Fire Brigade Director Gempp, chief of the Berlin Fire Brigade, who was provisionally granted leave of absence by Dr. Lippert, State Commissioner, was accused of having tolerated communist intrigues in the service under his control. Gempp then requested that disciplinary proceedings should be started against him. This request was not granted at the time, in view of the fact that Gempp was suspected of other offenses. Disciplinary proceedings have now been opened against him, as he is charged with dereliction of duty under Section 266 of the Criminal Code, in connection with the purchase of a motor car through one of the functionaries at that time, the Social Democrat councillor Ahrens. It is not only in the Gempp case that the National Socialists have used the tactics of getting rid of dangerous opponents by means of criminal charges. From the charges brought by Gempp against Goering, it is clear that Goering was interested in the spreading of the fire and not in putting it out. The National Socialists intended to use the incendiary act to deal a deadly blow against Marxism. With this in view, it was necessary that the damage done by the fire should be as great and impressive as possible, and therefore it was not to be put out too soon. 3 days after the fire, the building was opened for the public to see the effect. The same National Socialist inspector of the building who had sent the staff away early on February 27th was now the official guide through the ruined building. Tens of thousands of people crowded in to see the sight. The guide explained, in an expert way, how the fire had been started by the Communists, and he did not omit to amplify his description with atrocity stories of what the Communists had intended to do. Goering, who had not the courage himself to deny what the Saarbrücker Volksstimme reported, compelled Gempp to issue a dementi. Gempp seems to have refused to do so for some time. It was only on June 18, 1933, that a statement by him appeared in the German press, in which he declared that the report published in the Volksstimme was false. There is some dementis which establish the truth of the report that is denied, and Gemp's delayed dementi is one of this kind. Under the pressure of the charges made against him, and from fear of the sentence of imprisonment with which he was threatened, Gempp gave way to Goering's threats. End of Chapter 4, Part 3.
Chapter 4, Part 4 of Brown Book of the Hitler Terror. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Brown Book of the Hitler Terror by Lord Marley. Chapter 4, The Real Incendiaries, Part 4. Where are the instigators of the fire? In the second March number of the conservative weekly journal Der Ring, which is edited by Heinrich von Gleichen, we find the fire in the Reichstag led to extremely severe countermeasures by the government of the Reich. The authorities are maintaining a state of preparedness for all eventualities. The public and the leading articles in the press are asking, how is it possible? Are we then really a nation of blind hens? Where are the instigators of this fire, whose results show how sure they were of their aims? To give a single answer to all questions, we must say in all seriousness and to the point, we have no secret service, such as the English and other nations have. If we had such an institution, then we should by now know exactly where the instigators of the Reichstag fire were to be found. In fact, we should already know the actual persons. They are perhaps members of the best German international society. Heinrich von Gleichen is one of the most influential members of the Herren Club. Since Papen was chancellor, von Gleichen has been one of the wire pullers of the government's policy. His connections with the President's palace are more than excellent. In the extract quoted by us from The Ring, Von Gleichen openly charges the Hitler government with not having done anything to clear up the Reichstag fire. He asks, where are the instigators of this fire, whose results show how sure they were of their aims? Can anything else be meant by this than that the National Socialists organized the fire in order confidently to win one position of power after the other? After this issue, the ring was prohibited. Dr. Bell tells tales out of school. Elsewhere in this book, an exact account is given of Dr. Bell's death at the hands of the Nazis. Here we deal only with his role in connection with the Reichstag fire. We do not propose to rely on the reports which state that before the Reichstag fire, between 8 and 9 on February 27th, Dr. Bell told English and American journalists that the Reichstag was on fire. This statement was deliberately circulated by the Hitler government. The Nazis wanted a favorable opportunity for a dementi, and for thus discrediting what Dr. Bell had really stated. Dr. Bell knew van der Lubbe very well, and he was also kept closely informed by van der Lubbe of the connections he had formed with Nazi circles in Munich and Berlin. Although for about a year Dr. Bell had been hostile to the National Socialist Party, he still had a number of men within the party who kept him informed. He knew exactly what had taken place in connection with the Reichstag fire. In the National Club in the Friedrich-Ebert-Strasse on March 3rd or 4th, Bell betrayed what he knew about the Reichstag fire to a politician belonging to the People's Party. This politician wrote to some of his friends, telling them the information which Bell had given him as to who were the real incendiaries. One of these letters fell into the hands of Daluegas, the chief of the secret police. The letter cost Bell his life. On April 3rd, he was murdered in the village of Kufstein in Austria by Nazis who went there from Munich. The murder of Hanussen. The clairvoyant Erich Hanussen gave a housewarming party on the day before the Reichstag fire at his new flat in Berlin, Leitzenbergstrasse 16, which he called the Palace of Occultism. Some of the Nazi leaders were present on this occasion, including Count Helldorf, leader of the Berlin Nazis, as well as artists, actors, and journalists. Among them there was also a reporter of the Berliner 12 Uhr Blatt. In the séance which Hanussen staged, he said, among other things, "I see a great house burning." In the first March number of his weekly paper, Hanussen's Bunte Wochenschau, Hanussen printed an article on the political situation. He wrote in this article that he had known in advance of the Reichstag fire, but that he was not able to speak openly of it. It is clear that some leading Nazi must have given Hanussen information before the Reichstag fire, which enabled Hanussen to foresee it. Hanussen must have known a great deal. This is clear from a sworn deposition given us by Dr. Franz Hollering, former editor of the Berliner 12 Uhr Blatt. The undersigned Dr. Franz Hollering hereby declares on oath, in my capacity as editor-in-chief of the Berliner 12 Uhr Blatt and of the Montag Morgen, I was brought into touch between February 1st and March 4th, 1933, with Erich Hanussen as the publisher of his National Socialist Clairvoyant Journal, which was set up and printed in the same printing works as the papers named above. I did not get to know Hanussen personally, but I had a telephone conversation with him on one occasion when he was trying to get in touch with the business manager of the printing works and the editor, Rolly Nürnberg, who were not there at the time. That was in the night of February 27th, the night of the burning of the Reichstag. The first report of the discovery of the fire had hardly reached the office when Hanussen rang up on the telephone. He wanted to know from me how far the fire had spread and whether the incendiaries had been caught. I replied that an unconfirmed report had reached me about a communist troop which was alleged to have set fire to the Reichstag with the help of torches. At the same time, I pointed out that this report was incredible. I said in so many words that the communists, particularly in the existing political situation, would never have committed such a suicidal act of folly. Hanussen replied in an excited voice that he was of quite the opposite opinion, that he knew it was a communist plot, and that I would very soon see the consequences. This call came through between 9:30 and 9:45. I made inquiries of my staff, which knew of Hanussen's close connections with Count Helldorf, particularly through his frequent telephone calls to the printing works. Hanussen was generally regarded as exceptionally well informed on National Socialist plans. Signed, Dr. Franz Hollering. Thus, at a time when the first vague reports of the fire in the Reichstag had only just reached the editorial offices of the newspapers, Hanussen was already saying that the fire had been started by the communists and that it would have serious consequences. This statement of Hanussen's shows more clearly than anything else that his informant is to be found in high Nazi circles. The Jew Hanussen did not long enjoy the rule of Hitler, which he had so earnestly desired. On April 7, 1933, his body was found in a little wood by the side of the Bayreuth-Neuhof road. He had died at the hands of the Nazis. The third man who knew the secret. After Bell, Hanussen. After Hanussen, Dr. Oberfohren. Of these three persons who knew the secret of the burning of the Reichstag, Dr. Oberfohren was the most dangerous. Bell could be got rid of as a political adventurer, Hanussen as a charlatan. Dr. Oberfohren was an influential politician, leader of the German nationalist fraction in the Reichstag. In February 1933, he had declared in an election speech that the Hitler government would continue to exist in its then composition, whatever the results of the election. Events after February 27th shook his belief that the National Socialists would stand by the undertaking sworn by Hitler on January 30th. Dr. Oberfohren put forward within the German Nationalist Party the proposal that it should begin the fight against Hitler's policy of concentrating power in his own hands. In order to win his friends for this fight, he recorded what he knew of the Reichstag fire and of the struggle within the cabinet in the memorandum which has already been quoted. The following description by Dr. Oberfohren deals with what happened after the Reichstag fire. The German nationalists and the fire. However much the German Nationalist Party is in agreement with the sharpest measures against the communists, it cannot approve of the act of incendiarism carried out by its coalition friends. It is true that the cabinet meeting on Tuesday agreed to the sharpest measures against the communists and partly also against the Social Democrats. However, no doubt was left that the act of incendiarism would most seriously damage the reputation of the National Front abroad. In this meeting of the cabinet, the sharpest expressions of condemnation were not spared. The National Socialist ministers did not succeed in pressing through the prohibition of the Communist Party. As already said above, the German nationalists needed the Communist deputies in order to prevent the National Socialists from having an absolute majority in Parliament. At this cabinet meeting, Herr Göring was strictly forbidden to produce in public his forged material from Karl Liebknecht House. It was pointed out that the publication of these crude forgeries would only make things still worse for the government. It was particularly inconvenient for the government that the Communist deputy Torgler, leader of the Communist fraction in the Reichstag, had put himself at the disposal of the police on Tuesday morning. His flight would have been preferable. The fact that after thousands of Communist functionaries had been arrested, and in spite of the threat of a court-martial, he had presented himself to the police, was extremely inconvenient for the government. Herr Goering was commissioned to deny that Torgler had given himself up voluntarily. The echo in the world press, however, which followed the Reichstag fire was so unexpectedly unanimous in attributing the act of incendiarism to leading members of the government that the prestige of the national government was most seriously shaken. However convenient it was for Goering and Goebbels that the Communist and Social Democratic election propaganda had been silenced, however well they knew that the broad mass of lower middle-class persons, clerks and peasants, would believe the story of the Reichstag fire and would consequently give their votes to the National Socialist Party as the leader of the fight against Bolshevism, they were seriously disturbed at the attitude of the German nationalist ministers in the cabinet. Once again, they did not get the prohibition of the Communist Party. In spite of their boundless pretensions, they felt that they were held in an iron embrace by the German nationalists, Stahlhelm and the Reichswehr. It was clear to them that they must get out of this embrace as soon as possible. They discussed all kinds of proposals. Finally, the groups decided to make a bid for power by a coup in the night of March 5th to 6th. The plan was to occupy the government quarter and demand from Hindenburg a change in the composition of the cabinet. In this event, Hindenburg was to appoint Adolf Hitler to take over the functions of President of the Reich, and at the same time Hitler was to appoint Goering Chancellor. The discussions led up to the decision to carry through the plan in connection with the great propaganda march of Nazi stormtroops and protective corps through Berlin, at which Hitler would take the salute on Friday, March 3rd. This great propaganda march was then organized. Numbers of provincial stormtroop sections arrived in Berlin, the streets were cleared by the police for the triumphal march, traffic was diverted, and thousands of people crowded to the Wilhelmstrasse to see the march past the leader Adolf Hitler. As rumors had been gaining ground that the government quarter was to be occupied in the course of this march, at the last moment the German nationalist ministers in the cabinet insisted that Adolf Hitler should abandon the march past in the Wilhelmstrasse. The thousands waiting at the Wilhelmstrasse were suddenly told, to their astonishment, that the Nazi march would follow another route, and would not touch the Wilhelmstrasse, but would go through Prince Albrechtstrasse into the west of the town. However, the German nationalists were obliged to agree for their part to abandon a Stahlhelm march through the government quarter, which had been announced for the day of the elections as an act of homage to Hindenburg. The Stahlhelm leaders agreed to the change. The position was extremely serious for the German nationalist ministers. The election results in Lippe-Detmold had shown how great the danger was that German national electors would pass over the National Socialists in a body. German nationalist propaganda could not compete with the unrestrained propaganda carried on by the National Socialists. The Herren Club, the groups connected with the Stahlhelm, and the German nationalist leaders discussed the position. After the occupation of the government quarter on March 3rd had been averted, it was necessary to prepare for the threatened coup on the night of March 5th through 6th, with more than the Reichswehr and the Stahlhelm. It was clear that the masses were now no longer behind the old field marshal, but behind their idol, Adolf Hitler. It would be futile to oppose these masses and the sentiment of the masses merely by the use of arms. It was therefore necessary to act as unscrupulously as Goering and Goebbels had done in connection with the Reichstag fire. The following plan was made. An official statement was to be made public dealing with the results so far arrived at in the inquiry in connection with the Reichstag incendiaries. This statement was so worded that, if necessary, it would be possible to refer to it to show that they were already then on the tracks of the National Socialist criminals. This official statement could then be used for the press on the night of March 5th through 6th as weapon against the National Socialist ministers, if these really attempted to carry out their plan of occupying the government quarter. It was hoped by these means to throw the National Socialist masses into confusion and, if possible, to win them for the National Front under the leadership of the German nationalists and for Hindenburg, to disclose the plans for the forcible seizure of power, to accuse Goering, Hitler, and Goebbels of the act of incendiarism in the Reichstag. on the basis of the official communiqué already issued, and to call on the millions of National Socialists to stand united behind Field Marshal Hindenburg to save the National Front against Marxism. It was hoped by these means to make the national masses prepared to accept a military dictatorship under Hindenburg. Hindenburg himself was not to be present at the Stahlhelm demonstration, but was to spend the night of March 5th to the 6th outside of Berlin under the protection of the Reichswehr, and the Reichswehr itself was to be mobilized for action. Murderer and incendiary. Dr. Oberfohren wrote in his memorandum, "In the meantime, the men charged by Herr Göring under the leadership of Heines, Silesian storm troop leader and Reichstag deputy, passed along the heating passages from the palace of the President of the Reichstag and through the underground passage into the Reichstag. The point at which each of the selected storm troop and protective corps leader was to start a fire was arranged in detail. A general rehearsal had been held the previous day. Van der Lubbe went with them as the fifth or sixth man. When the observation posts in the Reichstag sent word that the air was clear, the incendiary set to work. The starting of the fire was completed within a few minutes. Then, their work accomplished, they made their way back by the same route as they had come. Van der Lubbe alone remained behind in the Reichstag building." Dr. Oberfohren's statement that Heines was in charge of the incendiary column is confirmed from other sources, including Dr. Bell. Heines was especially suitable for this work. He murders when he is told to, he shoots when he is told to, and he sets fire when he is told to. The incendiary's base. Even if Goering's tools had prepared the act of provocation more carefully, and had not made the whole series of contradictions which in themselves are overwhelming evidence of the Nazis' guilt, the case against the Nazis would still be clear to all eyes to see. The Vossische Zeitung of March 1st, 1933, contains the following statement emanating from government sources. It is stated that there is irrefutable evidence that Deputy Torgler, chairman of the Communist faction of the Reichstag, was in the Reichstag building for several hours with the incendiary, and that he had also been in company with other persons who participated in the incendiary act. It is added that the other criminals may have been able to escape through the underground passage used in connection with the heating equipment of the Reichstag, which connects the Reichstag building itself with the building of the President of the Reichstag. As we have already said, there is in fact an underground passage leading from the Reichstag building to the house of the President of the Reichstag. At the time of the Reichstag fire, the occupant of this house, to which the underground passage leads, was Hermann Göring. He occupies the house through which, according to his own version, the criminals escaped. Hermann Göring is not only Prime Minister of Prussia, Minister of Police, and President of the Reichstag. Hermann Göring is also one of the chiefs of the storm troop organization. Hermann Göring has at his disposal a special storm detachment, Storm Detachment G. His house is constantly guarded by a staff guard consisting of at least 30 men. The official Preußische Pressedienst announced that at least 7 men must have been concerned in bringing the incendiary material into the Reichstag, and the actual operation of starting the fire must have taken 10 men. If we accept this statement, at least 10 men must have been concerned in the fire. It can be safely assumed that the fire was started at a number of different points in different parts of the building. Otherwise, it would be impossible to explain the rapidity with which the fire spread in the huge building. To start the fire at several points required a considerable quantity of inflammable material weighing several hundredweight. In his report to fire brigade inspectors and men, Director Gemp stated that after the fire he observed a considerable quantity of incendiary material which had not been used, and that a lorry would have been required to carry it. The statement by Director Gemp confirms the assumption that the incendiaries must have taken a large quantity of incendiary material into the Reichstag. How was the incendiary material taken into the Reichstag? We have given a description of the obstacles a visitor has to overcome in order to get into the Reichstag. Visitors are only admitted through door 5. They have to pass through a series of officials. Can it be imagined that between 7 and 10 men carrying several hundredweight of incendiary material can have slipped into the Reichstag without being noticed by a single one of the Reichstag officials? Even the most prejudiced observer must admit that no incendiary and no group of incendiaries could have dared to bring in the material through door 5. The case is just the same with the so-called deputies' entrance, door 2. Only deputies are allowed to enter by this door. The idea that deputies could have brought hundredweights of incendiary material past the officials at door 2 is no less absurd than the idea that the material could have been brought in by door 5. The incendiaries would therefore have been obliged to choose some other way, a secret way, which would allow them to bring the material into the Reichstag and distribute it at the points required. There is such a secret way into the Reichstag, namely the underground passage, which connects the house of the President of the Reichstag with the Reichstag building itself. This underground passage was the strategic route for the incendiaries. But anyone who wants to use the underground passage to the Reichstag was obliged first to pass through Goering's house, the house of the President of the Reichstag. He was therefore obliged to get past the guards, who were constantly watching Goering's house. He would also had to have run the risk of being seen by someone in Goering's house. Is it conceivable that communists could have got into Goering's house and through it and through the underground passage without being stopped and arrested by the guard of 30 men? Is it conceivable that communists could have taken hundredweights of incendiary material through Goering's house without having been stopped and arrested by the guard? Is it conceivable that communists could have escaped through Goering's house? It is out of the question. Any communist who in those days of February had tried to enter Goering's house would without a doubt have been arrested. It was impossible for communists to reach the Reichstag by way of Goering's house and the underground passage. But for whom, then, was it possible? Only leading National Socialists could have entered Goering's house without attracting attention and without arousing even the slightest suspicion. Many meetings took place in the house between Goering and the leading officials of the National Socialist Party. No storm troop man would have thought of stopping men who held high positions in his party and whom he often saw visiting Goering's house. There was no danger for such people. They could go in and out as they liked. This is true of all the higher officials. They could have brought the incendiary material required in small quantities without any difficulty and without attracting any attention. The guards would not have noticed anything if a number of chests described as documents or even as arms had been delivered to the basement of the house. The transport of arms was taking place in those days wherever there was a Nazi headquarters. Goering's house was the key position for the attack on the Reichstag. Whoever controlled Goering's house could do what he liked to the Reichstag building. Goering's house was the bridgehead from which the incendiary column advanced to the assault. Goering's house was the depot where the incendiary material was stored. Goering's house was the safe port into which the criminals could flee when they had perpetrated their crime. The incendiary column. We said above that only leading National Socialists could have entered Goering's house without arousing suspicion. Dr. Oberfohren also speaks of selected leaders of the storm troops and protective corps. It is clear that the National Socialist leadership, which devised and organized the plan of the Reichstag fire, were very much interested in seeing that the carrying out of the plan was entrusted to their most reliable praetorians. Goebbels and Goering could not put themselves into the hands of any storm troop members. They could not run the risk that some discontented storm troop men might expose the real incendiaries. Therefore, they had to seek their accomplices in the ranks of the highest officials of the party. Men had to be found who, on the one hand, would not shrink from any crime, and on the other, were so closely linked to the National Socialist leadership and with their fate that they could not be suspected of any treachery. And the ranks of the leaders of the National Socialist Party leadership are full of persons who satisfy these conditions. We know from Dr. Oberfohren's memorandum that the murderer Heines was put in charge of the incendiary column. How was the incendiary act carried out? The incendiary column assembled in Goering's house. Heines, Schultz, Helldorf, and the others could get past the guards without interference, as they were known as storm troop leaders. Van der Lubbe probably went in with Count Helldorf. The first task which had to be carried out was the transport of the incendiary material, for which purpose the incendiaries used the underground passage to the Reichstag from Goering's house. It is probable that several journeys had to be made. They began their operations at an agreed signal which told them that the last deputy had left the Reichstag. There was no danger of discovery by the Reichstag officials on duty, for these had been sent home by the Nazi inspector before the end of their spell of duty. The distribution of the incendiary material at the various points, and pouring petrol, benzine, etc., over it, must have taken some little time, at least 20 minutes. Then the fire was started at different points. The first reports issued by the police and the fire brigade spoke of 7 to 10 incendiaries and of the fire having started at many points. No one in Germany believed that the incendiaries had got into the Reichstag in the usual way and had left by the usual way. The question was raised, how did the incendiaries escape? Any careless talk by a policeman, any careless talk from the fire brigade, any newspaper report might create an alarming position. Goering was in an extremely difficult situation. He resorted to an old trick. Before anyone else suggested that the incendiaries must have escaped through the underground passage, Goering wanted to say it himself. He hoped thereby to meet the imminent danger, to present something that was highly suspicious as quite harmless. Goering himself stated that the incendiaries had escaped through the underground passage. But later he bitterly regretted that he had said this. The trick had not come off. And so this underground passage to Goering's house was never again mentioned in any minister's speech or in any official report. Goering's statement was to be forgotten. We have not forgotten it. It is a fact that the incendiaries escaped through the underground passage, but they could only use this passage because they knew it led to Goering's house. Goering's house meant safety. The official Preußische Pressedienst of February 28th stated that the incendiaries had full knowledge of the building. Who other than Goering's friends were in the best position to gain full knowledge, to examine and test the underground passage? Goering was master in the Reichstag. He could give his friends information about every corner of it. He was master in the palace of the president of the Reichstag. He could receive his friends there. He could arrange a store and hiding place for the incendiary material. He was Prussian Minister of the Interior. He controlled the police throughout Prussia. All the possibilities of organizing the burning of the Reichstag were in the hands of Goering. Van der Lubbe in the burning Reichstag. The Preußische Pressedienst tried to persuade the public that van der Lubbe had been unable to escape because he did not know the building. According to Goering and the Preußische Pressedienst, all of van der Lubbe's accomplices were quite familiar with the building. It would have been easy for them to take van der Lubbe with them and to save him. But van der Lubbe could not be saved. He had to be left behind in the burning Reichstag, and was left behind because he was the evidence against the Communists. Van der Lubbe played his part to the best of his ability. He let himself be arrested in the burning building. He had discarded his shirt and coat so as to present a true picture of a communist incendiary. He confessed to having set fire to the Reichstag. He confessed to any act of incendiarism required in the welfare office in Neukölln, in the Berlin town hall, in the Berliner Schloss. Van der Lubbe will confess to everything which his employers ask him to confess. He will say against Torgler whatever his employers tell him to say. He will say against Dimitrov everything that is wanted. He will inculpate everyone whom his National Socialist friends wish to destroy. He will exculpate everyone whom his National Socialist friends wish to protect. Hermann Göring. But all of van der Lubbe's confessions could not prevent the failure of the second task which had been entrusted to him, by giving himself up and confessing to shelter the real incendiaries. The figure of van der Lubbe was too small for this. His role was too obvious. Everyone saw through the trick. They realized that behind van der Lubbe was Captain Hermann Göring, one of the storm troop chiefs, minister of the German Reich, premier and minister of the interior of Prussia, president of the German Reichstag. Captain Göring was born in Rosenheim, Bavaria, on January 12, 1893. His biographers tell us of his heroic deeds as an airman during the war. They forgot to add that his flights were carried out when he was under the influence of morphia. Göring's biographers tell us that in 1925 through 26 he was in Stockholm working for an airplane company. They forgot to add that Hermann Göring, according to the official reports of the Stockholm police, was put into the asylum at Langbro because a doctor had certified him to be of unsound mind. He was subsequently taken to the Konradsberg Hospital near Stockholm, but as a result of his conduct he was taken back to Langbro and there kept shut up. He could no longer be kept in private mental homes because the staff were unwilling to look after him. And in Langbro he had such bad attacks that he had to be put into the section for serious cases. All the attempts made by Göring to deny these facts are vain, as we have a photograph of the official registration card recording Göring's admission to the Langbro asylum. Göring's biographers like to record his marriage with Karin von Fock. She had previously been married to a Swede, Captain Kansow. After the divorce, the former couple had a lawsuit over the guardianship of their son Thomas. During the court proceedings on April 22, 1926, a certificate signed by the police doctor Karl A. Lundberg was submitted. We print a photograph of this certificate, which says in so many words that Göring is seriously addicted to drugs. Göring's morphia craving has therefore been established before the courts. The court decided that Göring could not have the guardianship of the boy Thomas. National Socialism has given Göring the guardianship of 60 million Germans. On March 10, 1933, Göring made a speech in Essen, in the course of which he said, quote, "My nerves have never given way up to now." Unquote. He hoped by this remark to silence the statements published in the foreign press regarding his nervous condition. At that time he did not realize that there was in existence documentary proof of his nervous condition, his insanity, his craving for morphia. It is no accident that this man is playing a leading part in the Third Empire. He embodies the whole brutality of the old Prussian officers' corps, which has been striving for power ever since 1918. He is the embodiment of the sadism which in the last few months has led to thousands of murders and tens of thousands of brutal and cruel acts of maltreatment. He is the embodiment of that officers' clique which murdered Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, which shed streams of blood in Hungary, which set up white gallows in Finland, and is now making the whole of Hitler's Germany into a brown hell. Goering represents the content of the policy of the National Socialists. National Socialism does not represent the workers, or the employees, or the middle class, but it represents the interests of the ruling class, of the noble caste. Power was put into the hands of the National Socialists in order that they should maintain the existing economic system and protect it against the menacing forces of social revolution. To protect these interests, National Socialism has taken its highest officials from the ranks of the former officers' corps of the nobility and the high state officials. This Captain Goering, brutal in the extreme, lying and cowardly in the extreme, shows the true face of National Socialism. This Captain Goering was the organizer of the Reichstag fire. His party comrade Goebbels invented the plan. Goering carried it through. All the opportunities for doing so were in his hands. All the necessary power was in his hands. He held all the threads. It was the morphia fiend Goering who set fire to the Reichstag. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Brown Book of the Hitler Terror. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Brown Book of the Hitler Terror by Lord Marley. Chapter 5. Destruction of the Workers' Organizations. Now the hour of reckoning has come when we draw conclusions. Let them be under no illusion that this reckoning may come to some unexpected end. The end of the revolution is the end of the November criminals, the end of that system, the end of that period. We will hunt out these men from their last hiding places, and we will not rest until the body of our nation has been rid of the last traces of that poison. Hitler, on May 7th, 1933, at Kiel. Hitler expropriates. Hitler has not nationalized a single trust, nor has he expropriated a single financial magnate. But in the first few months of his rule he has carried through the expropriation of the political and trade union working class organizations of Germany. All communist and social democratic newspapers were prohibited from the night of the burning of the Reichstag. During that week the Karl Liebknecht House in Berlin, the former headquarters of the Communist Party, was expropriated under the Hitler government's emergency decree of February 1933. Then all the printing establishments and buildings owned by the Communist Party throughout Germany were expropriated, and the same procedure was applied to the Berlin evening paper Welt am Abend. The attack on trade union property. Even before the burning of the Reichstag, systematic attacks on trade union buildings and people's houses all over Germany has been made by storm-troop detachments. On March 9th, in Chemnitz, the business manager of the Social Democratic printing works, Landgraf, was shot by stormtroopers when they occupied the works. On the same date, workers armed with rifles and hand grenades defended the trade union house at Wurzen against a storm-troop attack. In Braunschweig, Hans Seile, the circulation manager of the Social Democratic paper Volksfreund, was shot by stormtroopers who occupied the offices of the paper. On the same date, there was a partial strike of the Dresden workers against the looting by Nazis of the people's houses in that town. On the same date, the trade union house in Berlin was looted. The following account of the attack on the trade union headquarters and the Otto Braun house in Königsberg has been given us by an eyewitness. The health section of the Trade Union Association was having its usual monthly meeting and social gathering. Nazi stormtroopers came into the building, and suddenly the doors of the room were torn open, and about 60 men, armed with revolvers, forced their way into the hall and fired a number of shots at the ceiling and the wall. 5 people were wounded, 1 seriously, by bullets glancing off the walls. Then the bandits drove men and women out into the street without their hats and coats, which were confiscated. After that, the Nazis went through the trade union offices, destroying everything. In the case of the Otto Braun house, 2 uniformed police officers came to the building at 11:20 p.m. and took away the revolver which was in the possession of the night watchman. They then told him that they would hold him as a hostage, and that they would have to shoot him if any armed person was found in the house. 10 minutes later, a strong storm troop detachment made its appearance and entered the building. The caretaker of the building, with his wife and 2 daughters, lived there in a flat. 3 Nazis went to the flat and, threatening the caretaker with the revolvers, ordered him at once to open all the rooms in the building. Then the stormtroopers began to smash up everything. They first made for the office of the Reichsbanner organization and chopped up every piece of furniture into tiny fragments using axes which they had brought with them. Valuable pictures were destroyed, the cash box was broken open, and every desk smashed. The office was left simply a heap of rubbish. The district office of the Social Democratic Party was dealt with in the same way, and also the office of the Freethinkers organization. Then the business manager of the Königsberger Volkszeitung was fetched by 3 stormtroopers and forced to take them through the offices at the point of the revolver. He was then made to open the garages, which were let to private individuals and firms, and to put the motors there out of action. With the 3 revolvers pointing at him, he was forced to burn a black-red-gold banner in the street. The Saarbrück Volksstimme of March 13th contains the following report of the occupation by Nazis of the offices of the Mine Workers Union in Bochum. The central offices for the Reich, which are also the headquarters of the Bochum Mine Workers Union, were attacked by Hitler's bandits belonging to the storm troops and protective corps, and destroyed from top to bottom. All documents were set alight, the fire spreading to parts of the building, and the whole of the central executive, or those members who were there, including the president Husmann, a member of the Reichstag, were carried off by the stormtroopers and protective corpsmen. These few examples are only a small sample of what went on at the time in every part of Germany. The swastika flag was hoisted over every trade union building, every people's house, every newspaper office belonging either to the Social Democratic Party or to the Communist Party. Moral provocation. The burning of the Reichstag was not enough in the way of acts of provocation for the National Socialists, who also resorted to moral provocation. They called the Karl Liebknecht House Horsfessel House, and made it the headquarters of the political police. Karl Liebknecht's name is known to the workers of the whole world. In defiance of martial law, Karl Liebknecht raised his voice against the slaughter of the war. Who was the National Socialist hero Horst Wessel? He was a student, the son of a Berlin clergyman. Even the Nazis cannot deny that this hero, who used to hunt Marxists at night with his storm troops, lived on the earnings of a prostitute. He was killed in this prostitute's flat by one of her former lovers. The legend writers of National Socialism say that Horst Wessel only wanted to save this woman's soul. The National Socialist press asserted, and this became the official legend, that Horst Wessel had fallen at the hands of the communists. Organizations dissolved. There has not been, and there is not now, any formal prohibition of the Communist Party in Germany. But the campaign of terror has in fact put all communist leaders and functionaries outside the law. All organizations which were believed to stand on the basis of the class struggle were outlawed. The trade union organizations of the revolutionary workers among the miners and the metal workers of Berlin and the whole of the revolutionary trade union opposition were driven underground. Revolutionary workers' organizations uniting all parties, such as the Anti-Fascist League, the Red Sports organizations, the revolutionary associations of writers and artists and photographers, etc., were treated in the same way as the Communist Party from the moment of the Reichstag fire. The German Red Aid, a working-class organization for the support of political prisoners and their families, which helped all workers irrespective of their political affiliation, was driven underground. Even aid for the victims of fascist barbarity has to be organized secretly. The International Workers' Relief, which organized help for strikers during industrial disputes, was also outlawed. Its property was confiscated and its officials and members were persecuted. All the social and cultural organizations of the working class were suppressed. The children's organizations, the League for the Protection of Motherhood, the Association of Social and Political Organizations. All pacifist organizations met the same fate. The League for Human Rights, the German Peace Society, and many others. The elections of works councils which took place at the end of March were overshadowed by the campaign of repression of the workers' organizations and could not give a true reflection of the feeling among the workers. A report from the Union Engineering Factory in Dortmund is typical of how these elections were carried out in almost all German factories. At the Union Works in Dortmund, the foreman, Dickmann, whose duty it was to superintend the ballot, was arrested on the day before the election. The Nazis took charge of the ballot papers and called on the workers to vote. Any workers who refused to vote was told that he would be regarded as an enemy of the national government. The table at which the ballot papers were filled was surrounded by armed Nazis. Each worker who came up to vote was listed, and a note was kept of which ballot paper he placed in the envelope and handed in. At the end of the ballot, the leader of the Nazis took charge of the ballot box and, with his friends, counted up the votes. Not a single worker of any other organization was allowed to check the result. Yet, in spite of such methods, the elections did not give the Nazis a majority in most factories throughout Germany. What the Nazis could not get by intimidation and falsification was therefore secured by them through the open use of force during the month of April. The cleansing of the works councils by the removal of all elected trade union and revolutionary representatives. Even representatives of the Christian unions, who were known as anti-fascists, were removed from office. Stormtroopers marched into the room where the Works Council was meeting, maltreated and imprisoned some, and forced them to resign under the threat of their lives. Appointed Nazi Works Councilors were put in to correct the election results in every factory. Destruction of the trade unions. The National Labor Day of May 1st, when hundreds of thousands of workers were driven to participate in the official demonstrations by the threat of instant dismissal, served as a preparatory step to the occupation of all trade union offices by the Nazis on May 2nd. The dissolution of the trade unions in the form in which they had hitherto existed was proclaimed in the name of a Committee for the Protection of German Labor, which no one heard of until that moment. It did not help the German General Trade Union Federation that it had called on the workers to participate in the Hitler demonstration of May 1st. The trade union offices were occupied and the trade union leaders maltreated. The German Labor Front took over the whole trade union apparatus. We give below a few documents showing the methods that were used in these attacks on the trade unions. The National Socialists take over the trade unions. The leaders arrested. Action throughout the Reich. Headlines in the Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung, May 2nd, 1933. Yes, we have power, but we have not yet won the whole nation. We have not yet won you workers 100%. From the manifesto issued by Dr. Ley, May 2nd, 1932. Cleansing of the free trade unions and creation of a labor organization. Stormtroopers occupy all trade union buildings. 50 trade union leaders arrested. The second stage of the National Socialist Revolution. Headlines in the Völkischer Beobachter, May 3rd, 1933. After Germany, in the most comprehensive meaning of the word, had acknowledged on May 1st the National Socialist conception of the idea of labor, on May 2nd the implications of this acknowledgment were applied throughout the movement. The so-called free trade unions have been disloyal to their own real nature and have degenerated themselves and the trade union idea to the level of international Marxism. From Alfred Rosenberg's leading article in the Völkischer Beobachter, May 3, 1933. The National Socialist Factory Organization Journal, the Arbeitertum, which deals with the theory and practice of the National Socialist Factory Organization, becomes from today the official organ of the German General Trade Union Federation and of the AFA Federation. From the Ley Committee Manifesto issued on May 2, 1933. The chapter of Marxist incitement of the workers is closed. After the action taken against the Marxist trade unions met with such tremendous response throughout the nation and particularly in the working class, the General Association of Christian Trade Unions, the Trade Union Association of German Employees, Workers and Officials Associations, Herrschdunker, the Federation of Employees Trade Unions, and other smaller associations under the influence of this mighty national movement found themselves compelled to declare in writing that they put themselves unconditionally at the disposal of the leader of the National Socialist German Labor Party and would carry out without reserve the instructions of the Action Committee for the Protection of German Labor which he has appointed. From the manifesto issued by Dr. Ley on May 4th, 1933. Innumerable cases of corruption among the leaders of the Marxist trade unions. Balance sheet mysteries and dark financial transactions. 8 million organized workers brought under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. Headlines in the Völkischer Beobachter of May 1933. The first manifesto issued by Dr. Ley, the head of the Action Committee for the Protection of German Labor, was written in a very friendly tone. We have never destroyed anything which had any kind of value for our nation, nor shall we in the future. This is a fundamental principle of National Socialism. This holds good particularly of the trade unions, which have been built up out of the pennies which the workers have earned with such bitter toil and starved themselves to give. No, workers, your institutions are sacred and inviolable to us National Socialists. I myself am the son of a poor peasant, and I know poverty. I myself was for 7 years in one of the largest factories in Germany. It may be remarked in passing that Dr. Ley was never a worker, But in his 7 years of employment with the IG Farben Industrie AG, the chemical trust, was a highly paid official of the company and received a large sum when he left. At the moment when they took over the trade unions by force, the National Socialist leaders used the tactics of making a solemn promise to the organized workers that their institutions would be maintained. At the same time, the National Socialist press started a great campaign on the corruption in trade union offices, and the Nazi stormtroopers stood ready with their revolvers and rubber truncheons to persuade everyone of the friendship felt by the Nazis to the working class. A few weeks later, on June 10th, Dr. Ley issued his Fundamental Ideas on Corporate Organization and the German Labor Front, which he himself described as the foundation on which generations will be able to build anew for centuries. The essential paragraph in this so completely new foundation reads as follows: Leadership in the factory. Corporate organization will, as its first work, restore absolute leadership to the natural leader of a factory, that is, the employer, and will at the same time place full responsibility on him. Only the employer can decide. This passage, which proclaims the absolute dictatorship of the employer in the factory, contains not a trace of the sacredness and inviolability of the trade union organization. Henceforward, the trade unions are to be merely auxiliary instruments used by the state of fascist dictatorship. It is better that we should give it, Marxism, a last shot to finish it off, than that we should ever allow it to rise again. The Leiparts and the Grassmanns may hypocritically declare their devotion to Hitler as much as they like, but it is better that they should be in prison. Thereby we deprive the Marxist ruffians of their chief weapon, and of the last possibility of strengthening themselves afresh. The diabolical doctrine of Marxism must perish miserably on the battlefield of the National Socialist Revolution. From Dr. Ley's Manifesto of May 2nd, 1933. Corruption on corruption. One of the National Socialist methods of fighting is to settle their opponents by bringing charges of corruption against them. It was this method that they used to silence Gemp, the Berlin Fire Brigade director, who knew too much about the burning of the Reichstag. And this was the method they used to settle accounts with large numbers of the officials of the Weimar Republic and many leaders of bourgeois organizations which had not yet been brought into conformity. And it was the method they used to revenge themselves on Gericke, who in 1932 had been head of the Hindenburg Election Committee and therefore one of the chief opponents of Hitler's candidature for the presidency. When under Dr. Ley's guidance the free trade unions had been brought into conformity, the National Socialist leaders started their great campaign of exposing the corruption in the trade unions, by way of rounding off their soon-forgotten promises of raising trade union benefits and lowering contributions. Long accounts were published in the fascist press of how luxuriously the central offices of the various trade unions were furnished. Columns in the press recounted the high salaries drawn by the trade union leaders. The National Socialist leaders, who had placed the trade union apparatus under the bureaucratic political control of fascist commissioners, tried to rouse the militant members of the trade unions against the bureaucracy of their former leaders and against their policy of industrial peace, and to exploit this to get support for the cleansing carried out by the fascists. The poverty of the workers and the refusal of strike pay to them in former economic struggles was contrasted in the fascist press with the comfortable lives led by the trade union leaders. The Völkische Beobachter screamed in heavy type that the president of the AFA Federation, Aufhäuser, had arranged compensation for himself when he retired amounting to 18 months' salary at 940 marks, a total of 16,920 marks. In addition to facts which savored of corruption, the National Socialist unmaskers produced cases of corruption which they simply invented. Any use of money which did not suit the policy of the Nazis was labeled as dishonest. It was unmasked that in the presidential election campaign 300,000 marks of trade union money had been handed over by the General Trade Union Federation to the Social Democratic Party in aid of their campaign for Hindenburg. The Central Union of Employees had given 50,000 marks to the Reichsbanner organization in the spring of 1932, and two amounts of 15,000 marks to the Social Democratic Party funds in July and November of 1932. The revolutionary trade union opposition always opposed the use of trade union money for supporting the capitalist policy of the Social Democrats. But it is merely political trickery for the National Socialist leaders, who have themselves destroyed the workers' militant organizations, to oppose the use of trade union money for purposes which have nothing to do with the class struggle. Confiscation of the Social Democratic Party's property. The next step was the confiscation of all property belonging to the Social Democratic Party and the Reichsbanner. Berlin, May 10, 1933. An order had been issued for the confiscation of all the property of the Social Democratic Party and of its newspapers, as well as of the Reichsbanner and its press. The ground for confiscation is the great number of cases of dishonesty which have been discovered as a result of the taking over the trade unions and the labor banks by the National Socialist Factory Organization. In addition to the confiscation of the property of the Social Democratic Party, it must be stated that the property of all organizations connected with the party is also confiscated. Angriff, May 10, 1933. On the same date, all money belonging to the Social Democratic Party in post office accounts, party publishing concerns, and in the labor bank was confiscated. The offices of the Social Democratic organizations of the Reichsbanner and of the party press were closed. The official Preußische Pressendienst announced that Leipart, the trade union leader and Social Democratic member of the Reichstag, was to be prosecuted for breach of trust and fraud, on the grounds that specific contributions of trade union money had been used for purposes other than those for which they had been provided. The same steps were taken against all organizations connected with the Social Democrats: the Workers' Gymnastic and Sports Federation, the German Free Thinkers League, the Workers' Welfare Association, etc. On May 11th, the Consumers' Cooperative Society was put into safe hands. In order to safeguard the immensely valuable property of the cooperative societies, which is undoubtedly in danger, in the view of the leader, the Reich Minister for Economics, and other authorities concerned, it is necessary to put the consumers' cooperative societies into safe hands with a view to their liquidation. It is desirable that the societies in the first instance should not be impeded in their operations, but it is expressly emphasized that, on the other hand, there should be no further extension of the societies. Dr. Ley, leader of the German Labor Front, has entrusted the director of the Labor Bank, Karl Müller, with the carrying through of the necessary measures. Völkischer Beobachter, May 12, 1933. Under the slogan of the fight against corruption, the property of the trade unions was then confiscated. Following the confiscation of the property of the Social Democratic Party and of the Reichsbanner organization, the Corruption Department of the Prussian Ministry of Justice has now confiscated the entire property of the trade unions. Dr. Ley, the leader of the German Labor Front, has assumed responsibility for carrying this step into effect. Völkischer Beobachter, May 13, 1933. On June 23, 1933, the Hitler government dissolved the Social Democratic Party in the form which has now become usual. The party was forbidden to undertake any political activity, and its representatives were turned out of all parliaments. Even the support given by the Social Democratic Party to Hitler's declarations on foreign policy on May 17th in the Reichstag, and the efforts made by Lobe, the new party leader, to secure toleration from the Hitler government by repudiating the section of the Social Democratic Party executive which had emigrated, proved to have been in vain. Expropriation of communist property. On May 27, 1933, after every piece of property of the Communist Party and of the press and organizations associated with the party had been confiscated for some months, the following act on the confiscation of communist property was published. Section 1. Subsection 1. The supreme authorities of the federal states, or officials authorized by them, may confiscate for the benefit of the state any property and rights of the Communist Party of Germany and of its auxiliary and substitute organizations, as well as property and rights which are used or destined to be used for the furtherance of communist aims. Subsection 2. The Minister of the Interior of the Reich may requisition the supreme authorities of the federal states to take measures for the enforcement of subsection 1. Section 2. The provisions of Section 1 do not apply to property leased or put at the disposal of the Communist Party without transfer of ownership, except when the lessor or supplier had in view the furtherance of communist aims. Section 3. All existing rights relating to the property which is confiscated are cancelled. The confiscation of real estate does not, however, affect existing rights affecting the property. The authorities enforcing the confiscation may declare such rights cancelled where the value given in exchange for the rights was intended for the furtherance of communist aims. Section 4. In cases of hardship, creditors having claims on the confiscated property may receive compensation from the proceeds of this property. Section 7 provides that no compensation shall be given, and Section 8 empowers Dr. Frick, Reich Minister of the Interior, to issue regulations for the enforcement of the act. The Welt am Abend, a militant working-class paper with a big circulation in Berlin, was confiscated among the other property of the Communist Party, or of what were alleged to be communist organizations. When it became clear that the official National Socialist newspapers were not penetrating working-class circles, the Goebbels Ministry of Propaganda bethought itself of a new way of deceiving the workers. At the end of May, a new National Socialist journal began to appear with the same title and the same general make-up as the Welt am Abend. Its first few issues also followed the nature of the contents of the old paper. A so-called objective report on the Soviet Union was published, and in other ways an attempt was made to appeal to working-class readers. But within a very short time the new paper found itself obliged to defend itself publicly against the exposure of its aims, which had been made in illegal leaflets circulating among the workers of Berlin. The corporate aims of the National Socialists. The clearer it became that the National Socialist government could do nothing to overcome the economic difficulties facing Germany, but was in fact driving Germany forward to catastrophe, the more brutally the Nazis applied their dictatorial powers. They necessarily pushed forward towards the absorption of all power, towards the monopoly of all power in the hands of their own party and of its pseudo-workers' organizations. The Catholic Convention in Munich, at which the Vice-Chancellor von Papen was one of the official speakers, was dissolved by the police. Christian organizations were forbidden to undertake any activity other than religious. The growing rival force of the German nationalist factory and defense organizations was forcibly destroyed by the police. The few representatives of the Christian trade unions in the newly formed Great Convention of Labor, which formed the central organization of all the trade unions which had been brought into conformity, were thrown out of the convention under a regulation issued by Dr. Ley on June 23rd, on the grounds that they were enemies of the national government. In his Fundamental Ideas on the Corporate Organization and the German Labor Front, which were published in the Völkischer Beobachter of June 8th through 10th of 1933, Dr. Ley sets forth in programmatic form the corporate aims of the National Socialists after the worker organizations have been destroyed. A. The workers are forbidden to fight for higher wages, because such a fight is only the expression of greed for money. Ley's actual words were, "We know how the greed for profit can get control of men. We know how the greed for money dominates everyone. One man strives to get more wages, another strives for higher dividends. But just because we know this, we recognize with equal clarity that this beast within individual men should not be allowed to be nurtured by artificial organizations, but that it must be the task of a higher state leadership to set bounds to this human weakness, to restrain it, if necessary, to put brutal limits and barriers in its way. B. The leadership of the employer in the factory is to be restored without any limitation. Dr. Ley says, for this reason, corporate organization will, as its first work, restore absolute leadership to the natural leader of a factory, that is, the employer, and will at the same time place full responsibility on him. The Works Council of a factory is composed of workers, employees, and employers. Nevertheless, it will have only a consultative voice. Only the employer can decide. Many employers have for years had to call for the master in the house. Now they are once again to be the master in the house. C. The inflexible wages agreements of the past are to be smashed to pieces. Wages agreements must be as living and flexible as possible. D. The last illusion of independence is stripped from the former labor courts. Their place is taken by so-called corporate courts, composed of representatives of employers and selected fascists masquerading as representatives of workers and employees. The program put forward by Dr. Ley is not a private suggestion of his own, but a program worked out at Hitler's instructions on behalf of the party and the government. Its hostility to the workers and friendliness towards the employers is obvious. The corporate organization, which is supposed to be going to overcome the division of society into classes and the class struggle, is based at all points on the sharpening of the employer's class dictatorship. The appointment of 12 labor trustees, with power to dictate working conditions in all areas of Germany, is to serve the same purpose: the complete abolition of any rights possessed by the workers to a voice in determining their own conditions of life. The occupation by Nazis of all trade union posts and of all positions in the state and every form of organization paves the way for the establishment of a universal National Socialist bureaucracy. In the conditions existing under capitalism, with the forcible abolition of all control from below, this monopoly must necessarily be the source of the worst forms of corruption. But each day that passes shows that all the mania for destruction, the arbitrary measures and murder lust of the National Socialist leaders, is powerless to destroy the militant movement of the German working class. End of chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of Brown Book of the Hitler Terror. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Brown Book of the Hitler Terror by Lord Marley. Chapter 6, Part 1. The Campaign Against Culture. At the same time as their main attack against the German working class and its organizations, Hitler and Goebbels are also waging war against the best sections of the German intelligentsia. Nazi boots trample on the life work of the most prominent scientists and artists. In the literal sense, they trample on the brutally treated bodies of many intellectuals who are hated by the Nazis on account of their independence, their progressive and liberal outlook, although in many cases they have had no connection whatever with the militant workers. Under Hitler, even a liberal outlook is a crime which must be mercilessly avenged. Goebbels commands the Brown Inquisitors, who think that they can turn back the wheel of history to long before the French Revolution. Everything Jewish or supposedly Marxist, everything that embodies the progress and enlightenment of the last 150 years, is to be rooted out. In Hitler's Germany, there is no room for conceptions of any spiritual freedom, for any moderate goodwill felt by bourgeois professors to scientific impartiality, for even the most distant expression of the social struggle for the freedom of the masses in works of art. These are driven from professional chairs, from the stage, from the desks of lecturers and conductors. They are driven from the hospitals, from the research institutes and the academies. The pyres of advanced literature in German city squares blazon far into the distance the message that the brown barbarians intend not only to extirpate physically the most courageous and self-sacrificing anti-fascists, but also to destroy everything of any vitality and worth, and even anything that was at all progressive, even from a bourgeois standpoint. The last standard-bearers of intellectual liberalism are now being physically and intellectually murdered by that brown force which the ruling powers have unchained in order to postpone the collapse of the capitalist system. The most recent events in Germany have shown more clearly than ever that in our epoch the future of culture is inseparably connected with the working class struggle for freedom. Persecution of scientists. Fascism's deadly hatred is naturally directed against those intellectuals who have sided with the working class struggle for freedom or are connected with pacifist organizations. The attack on them followed immediately after the burning of the Reichstag. The first series of arrests, which began after the incendiary act of the Brown provocateurs, affected particularly the German group of the League of Doctors Against Imperialist War, which had been formed at Amsterdam. Since the end of February, the leader of this group, Dr. Felix Bonheim, has been in one of Hitler's prisons. Dr. Bonheim is an extremely respected specialist for internal diseases, and his many scientific works have made him famous. He belongs to no party. The scientific importance of his works secured for him a responsible post in the Hufeland Hospital, one of the largest in Berlin. The mere fact that Dr. Felix Bonheim put himself at the head of the doctors' movement against war has been enough to expose him to the undying hate of the Hitler Fascists. His work on behalf of the International Doctors' League has been arbitrarily denounced as high treason. He has not been allowed any legal aid. In spite of his imprisonment for several months, he has been refused any contact with his family. Max Hodan, known for his activities in the sphere of advice to working men and women in sexual matters, and author of a number of popular scientific works, has for some months been in the hands of Hitler's myrmidons. The well-known Marxist scientist Hermann Duncker, a name which ranks high in the workers' movement throughout the world, has been imprisoned in spite of his age and the fact that he was seriously ill. His life is in serious danger. The man who was regarded by a whole generation of social democratic workers as one of their most esteemed teachers is now being physically and mentally destroyed in Hitler's prisons. The writer Karl August Wittfogel, author of an extremely well-informed book on China, the writers Ludwig Wren, Karl von Ossietzky, Kurt Hiller, Egon Irvin Kisch, Erich Mühsam, Klaus Neukrantz, Erich Baron, and many others, and the doctors Professor Scheller of Breslau, Dr. Asch of Berlin, and Dr. Wohlgemuth of Hamburg have been arrested. The scientific institutes, universities, and schools are to be turned into drill halls for stormtroop culture. The persecution of scientists of high standing who are suspected of Marxist, pacifist, or liberal ideas touches even the ranks of the German Nationalist Party. The lecturing staffs of the most important German universities are being wiped out with a relentlessness worthy of the Vandals. Denunciation and the grabbing of posts by incompetent but at least ambitious near scientists are now the order of the day. The flower of German science driven out. We select only a few examples from the list of dismissals, persecutions, and of persons granted leave of absence. The best known case is that of Albert Einstein, whose reputation as a physicist is worldwide. Albert Einstein, a Swiss subject, member of the Prussian Academy of Sciences, has incurred the hatred of the Nazis for his left democratic political views, his active interest in the Jewish question, and his world-renowned scientific achievements. Einstein's scientific works were burnt in the bonfire at the University of Berlin amid the delighted howls of the Nazis. This act alone is enough to make Hitler's Germany a laughingstock in the world of modern science. No branch of modern industry can thrive without the exact sciences. But Hitler's regime has driven from their posts the most outstanding representatives of the exact sciences and mathematics. The University of Göttingen has a long tradition behind it, and in the last 50 years has trained a whole generation of brilliant research workers. The most prominent professors of this university have been driven out. James Franck, an experimental physicist with a worldwide reputation and a Nobel Prize winner, was forced to take voluntary leave of absence because he is a Jew. Professor Born, also a well-known physicist, is no longer allowed to carry on his un-German researches in Germany. Courant is a mathematician, an authority on the theory of functions. Bernstein is one of the most important European experts in actuarial mathematics. Emmy Noether has a reputation in the field of mathematics and higher algebra. All of these were driven out. The Berlin Faculty of Mathematics was also deprived of its most outstanding teachers, and the Berlin Technical University has also to record heavy losses. Among those who have been driven out is Professor Arthur Korn, a physicist who invented the first practical method of achieving television. The Berlin mathematicians who were sacrificed in the cleansing of the university include Schur, the algebraist, and Professors Missis and Bieberbach. This outburst of fury directed against the representatives of the exact sciences is suicidal even from the standpoint of the modern capitalist development of industry, and stands in sharp contrast with the opportunities which the Soviet Union has offered to all genuine scientists. Among the victims of the Nazi cleansing, there is a Nobel Prize winner of the name of Fritz Haber. Haber, the leader of an important school of chemists, was a scientific figure of the first rank even before the war. He invented the first practical method of obtaining nitrogen from the air. He is anything but a pacifist. During the war, his inventions were of the greatest service to Imperial Germany. His name represents the highest development of modern German chemistry. The Times of May 4, 1933, justly remarked that it is an irony of fate that the Nazis should compel this man to resign his post, when the fact that Germany was able to hold out for 4 years was in all probability due to him more than to any other man. Professor Polanyi, who was also driven out, was one of Haber's principal colleagues. Among others who had to make room for the cultural barbarism of the Nazis, we must also mention Professor Buch of Berlin, who has worked on the Planckian quantum theory, and the Königsberg mathematician Hensel, known for his original work on the theory of number, the Kiel professor Adolf Frankl, author of an important work on the theory of quantity, and the Berlin physicist Pringsheim, whose works deal with important problems of radiation. All the scientists mentioned are well-known research workers and lecturers of high standing in scientific circles. Even this very incomplete list is enough to show that these expulsions amount to the virtual destruction of German science, that German fascism is fighting every scientific advance with its inquisitions and incendiarism. No passports for scientists. The appointment of Albert Einstein to the Institute of France and the lectures given in Stockholm by Professor Bernhard Zondek, a dismissed gynecologist, led to the demand being seriously put forward that the passports of expelled university professors should be taken from them, that the un-German spirit of these scientists should not be allowed to benefit foreign universities. In connection with Einstein's appointment at the Institute of France, the Tagliche Rundschau, a journal of the Right, on April 17, 1933, demanded that the government should at once deprive the 16 dismissed university professors of their passports, as otherwise there could be no guarantee that one or other of them might not shortly occupy a chair in Paris, Oxford, or London, and use that post to carry on his anti-German politics. That in this connection it was necessary to remember that some of these professors, such as Kelsen, Lederer, and Bonn, had extremely good connections abroad. Germany's greatest doctors may not work in Germany. Bernhard Zondek has been described by Euler, the Swedish Nobel Prize winner for medicine, as the one outstanding genius. Zondek invented a method of chemical analysis of the urine which makes it possible to ascertain pregnancy in the earliest stages. This method is of extreme importance for social hygiene as well as from the purely medical standpoint. Zondek has done brilliant work in the investigation of hormones. He has been attempting to produce the sex hormones, substances which are different in men and women. Their existence was only recently discovered. He is one of the pioneers in this method of research, and quite recently achieved astounding success in the artificial reproduction of sex hormones. But the Hitler government deprives him of his professorial chair. Friedmann, who has been carrying on research into tuberculosis, has been removed from his post in Berlin. He is the inventor of a very valuable anti-tuberculosis serum, tuberculin. Moritz Burkhardt, director of the surgical department in the Moabit Hospital in Berlin, was in his youth an assistant of the famous German surgeon von Bergmann, and subsequently doctor in charge of the Virchow Hospital in Berlin. He has applied surgery in the fight against tuberculosis. He has now been removed from his post by a National Socialist Commissioner of Health. The destruction of the Hirschfeld Sexual Science Institute. A reliable witness, who, although not himself attached to the institute, was able to see and hear exactly what occurred, has made the following deposition as to the destruction of this scientific institute, which is known throughout the world. On the morning of May 6th, the Berliner Lokalanzeiger reported that the cleansing of Berlin libraries of books of un-German spirit would be begun that morning, and that the students of the Gymnastic Academy would make a start with the Sexual Science Institute. This institute was founded by Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld in 1918, in the house formerly occupied by Prince Hatzfeld, and was shortly afterwards taken over by the Prussian government as an institution of public importance. Its unique collection of exhibits, its research work, its archives, and its library won for it an international reputation and international connections. Many foreign scientists, doctors, and writers came to Berlin for the purpose of working at the institute. On the publication of the press notice referred to, an attempt was made to remove, for safe keeping, some of the most valuable private books and manuscripts, but this proved to be impossible, as the person removing the books was arrested by a guard which had evidently been placed round the institute during the night. At 9:30 a.m. some lorries drew up in front of the institute, with about 100 students in a brass band. They drew up in military formation in front of the institute, and then marched into the building with their band playing. As the office was not yet open, there was no responsible person there. There were only a few women and one man. The students demanded admittance to every room, and broke in the doors of those which were closed, including the office of the World League for Sexual Reform. When they found that there was not much to be had in the lower rooms, they made their way up to the first floor, where they emptied the ink bottles over manuscripts and carpets, and then made for the bookcases. They took away whatever they thought not completely unobjectionable, working for the most part on the basis of the so-called black list. But they went beyond this and took other books also, including, for example, a large work on Tutankhamen and a number of art journals which they found among the secretary's private books. They then removed from the archives the large charts dealing with intersexual cases, which had been prepared for the International Medical Congress held at the Kensington Museum in London in 1913. They threw most of these charts through the windows to their comrades who were standing outside. They removed from the walls other drawings and photographs of special types and kicked them round the room, leaving it strewn with torn drawings and broken glass. When one of the students pointed out that this was medical material, another replied that this was of no importance, that they were not concerned with the confiscation of a few books and pictures, but that they were there to destroy the institute. A long speech was then made, and a life-size model showing the internal secretion process was thrown out of the window and smashed to pieces. In one of the consulting rooms they used a mop to smash a pantostat used in the treatment of patients. They also took away a bronze bust of Dr. Hirschfeld and a number of other statues. On the first occasion they only seized a few hundred books out of the library of the Institute. The staff was kept under observation during the whole of the proceedings, and the band played throughout, so that a large crowd of inquisitive people gathered outside. At 12 o'clock the leader made a long speech, and then the gang left, singing a particularly vulgar song, and also the Horst Wessel song. The people in the Institute assumed that this concluded the robbery proceedings, but at 3 o'clock in the afternoon a number of lorries filled with storm troopers appeared and explained that they would have to continue the work of confiscation, as the men who had been there in the morning had not had time to make a proper clearance. This second troop then proceeded to make a careful search through every room, taking down to the lorries basket after basket of valuable books and manuscripts, 2 lorry loads in all. It was clear from the oaths used that the names of the authors whose books were in the special library were well known to the students. Sigmund Freud, whose photograph they took from the staircase and carried off, was called "that Jewish sow Freud," and Havelock Ellis was called "that swine." Other English authors wanted by them were Oscar Wilde, Edward Carpenter, and Norman Hare, and also the works of Judge Lindsay, the American juvenile judge, Margaret Sanger, and George Sylvester Viereck, and of French writers the works of André Gide, Marcel Proust, Pierre Loti, Zola, etc. The sight of the works of the Danish author Lundbach also made them break out into oaths. Many bound volumes of periodicals were also removed. They also wanted to take away several thousand questionnaires which were among the records, but desisted when they were assured that these were simply medical histories. On the other hand, it did not prove possible to dissuade them from removing the material belonging to the World League for Sexual Reform, the whole edition of the journal Sexus, and the Card Index. In addition, a great many manuscripts, including many unpublished ones, fell into their hands. They repeatedly inquired when Dr. Hirschfeld would be returning. They wanted, as they expressed it, to be given the tip as to when he would be there. Even before this raid on the Institute, storm troopers had visited it on several occasions and asked for Dr. Hirschfeld. When they were told that he was abroad, owing to an attack of malaria, they replied, "Then let's hope he'll die without our aid, then we shan't have to hang him or beat him to death." On May 7th the Berlin and Foreign Press reported the attack on the Sexual Science Institute, and the Executive Committee of the World League for Sexual Reform sent a telegraphic protest, pointing out that a considerable portion of the material was foreign property, and asking that it should at least not be burnt. No attention was paid to this telegram, which was addressed to the Minister of Education, and 3 days later all the books and photographs, together with a large number of other works, were burnt on the Opera Square. More than 10,000 volumes from the special library of the Institute were destroyed. The students carried Dr. Hirschfeld's bust in their torchlight procession and threw it on the fire. The Nazi report described this deed of culture in the following terms: energetic action against a poison shop. German students fumigate the Sexual Science Institute. Detachment X of the German student organization yesterday occupied the Sexual Science Institute, which was controlled by the Jew Magnus Hirschfeld. This institute, which tried to shelter behind a scientific cloak and was always protected during the 14 years of Marxist rule by the authorities of that period, was an unparalleled breeding ground of dirt and filth, as the results of the search have proved beyond question. A whole lorry load of pornographic pictures and writings, as well as documents and registers, have been confiscated. The criminal police will have to deal with a part of the material found. Another part of it will be publicly burnt. Angriff, May 6, 1933. Un-German sociologists and jurists. In turning out well-known sociologists and jurists, the National Socialists have also got rid of many good conservative elements. The best known of these dismissed professors is the Heidelberg sociologist Alfred Weber, who in connection with his brother Max Weber, now dead, published many profound studies of the forms of development of the primitive economy of a number of peoples and cultures in countries outside Europe. Weber is by no means a Marxist, but a bourgeois professor. But he committed the mortal sin of not describing other peoples and cultures as half-apish and subhuman, as laid down by National Socialism. The Berlin Commercial Academy loses its rector, the prominent liberal economist Professor Bonn. The professor of constitutional law, Anschutz, was compelled to leave Heidelberg University. He had been for many years a professor at Berlin University. Even in Imperial Germany he was an authority of the first rank in his sphere, and subsequently he was an authoritative commentator on the Weimar Constitution. Many of his colleagues were also sent into the wilderness. Professor Kelsen of Cologne, Harms, his colleague at Kiel, Feiler, former editor of the Frankfurter Zeitung, the Right Social Democrat Emil Radbruch, the Social Democrats Sinsheimer in Frankfurt, Lederer in Heidelberg, and Heller in Frankfurt, all of them jurists. The greatest German authority on civil law, Professor Martin Wolf, was forcibly driven out of his lecture room by swastika students. The liberal Lewin-Schucking of Kiel, an authority on international law, who represented Germany at the Hague International Tribunal, was driven from his post. Prominent psychologists, too, were driven from their lecture rooms. William Stern of Hamburg, who has published important works on child psychology, and Max Wertheimer of Frankfurt, are no longer allowed to lecture at German universities. In Hamburg, in addition to a half-dozen of less well-known professors, the philosopher Ernst Cassirer was dismissed. He was a man of great learning and reputation, of the so-called Marsburg school. Books by weight. In Berlin, the political police have confiscated approximately 10,000 hundredweight of books and periodicals, and removed them to the stables of the former mounted police, where they are being carefully examined. The seizure of the books was not carried out everywhere without friction. As soon as it became known that the operation was in progress, many libraries put their books into hiding places to prevent their seizure by the police. Most of the hiding places were, however, discovered. Many of the books were found scattered in coach houses, cellars, sheds, under floors, and in private houses. Völkischer Beobachter, May 21, 1933. On the bonfires. We are not and do not want to be the land of Goethe and Einstein, not on any account. Berliner Lokalanzeiger, May 7, 1933. When the Caliph wanted to burn the famous Library of Alexandria, some people begged him to preserve this valuable collection. Why? Asked the Caliph. If these books contain what is in the Koran, then they are superfluous, and if anything else is in them, then they are pernicious. And so the Library of Alexandria was burnt. On May 10th, the square in front of the Berlin Opera House, opposite the university, was aglow with the flames of a great bonfire. The whole square was cordoned off with brown and black detachments of the Storm Troops and Protective Corps. Lorries brought in gigantic heaps of books. Bands played, orders rang out. The Minister of Propaganda, Goebbels, rushed up in a car. In the year 1933, this extraordinary spectacle of the burning books took place, to the sound of the Horst-Wessel and Deutschland songs. On to the bonfire were thrown the works of Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Lenin and Stalin, Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Liebknecht, and August Bebel. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. On to the bonfire were thrown the works of pacifist writers, bourgeois poets and social reformers, whose names ranked high in bourgeois Germany. The flames consumed the works of Thomas Mann and Heinrich Mann, Leonhard Frank, Magnus Hirschfeld, Sigmund Freud, Jacob Wassermann, Stefan Zweig, Bert Brecht, Alfred Doblin, and Theodor Plivier. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. This destruction of all advanced creations of the intellect took place not far away from the pedestal of Alexander and Wilhelm von Humboldt in the Berlin University. Wilhelm von Humboldt, who founded this university and became one of the standard bearers of the spirit of the Enlightenment, aimed at raising Junker Prussia to the level of the bourgeois world of the West. Now, German students in Nazi uniform carried out this pogrom against advanced literature in front of his statue. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. The crackling flames in front of Berlin University, the pall of smoke over the heads of a chauvinistic mob, a speech from Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda. This made a spectacle which the Berliner 12 Uhr Mittagsblatt, a loyal Hitler journal, with unconscious irony described as spectral. It has forgotten the fires lighted by the oppressors of every age and what came of them. The flames in front of Berlin University were to consume not only Marxist works, but the highest achievements of bourgeois culture and science of the last 150 years. The mania for the destruction of all advanced literature raged through every province of Germany. Tens of thousands of private libraries were confiscated in the course of raids on houses, and often destroyed on the spot. The library in the Leipzig Volkshaus, one of the largest and most valuable libraries in Germany, with rare and irreplaceable publications of the working class movement, fell victim to the brown culture bearers' hatred of Marxism. Here are some instances of the public burning of books, reported by the German National Telegraphen Union of May 10th. Berlin, May 10th. In Munich, a ceremony was carried out in the inner court of the university, which was presided over by the rector. The official speech was made by the Bavarian Minister of Education, who spoke of the national revolution and the tasks of the universities. At the end of the proceedings there was a torchlight procession to the Königsplatz, where the burning of un-German books was carried out. In Dresden, the poet Wilhelm Vesper spoke at the students' demonstration. Here, too, there was a long torchlight procession to the Bismarck colonnade, where after an address by the senior Dresden student, all filthy and disgusting literature was burnt. In Breslau, the students' demonstration took place at the castle square. After an official speech by Professor Bornhausen, about 40 hundredweight of filthy and shameful books were burnt. In Frankfurt on Main, Professor Fricke opened the proceedings, which took place on the historic Römerberg. A wagon, filled with the books which were to be burnt as a symbol, was drawn by 2 oxen to the place where the bonfire had been made. The burning of the books concluded with the singing of the Horst Wessel song. A few days earlier, the works of the great German poet Heinrich Heine had been committed to the flames in Düsseldorf. In his speech at Berlin, Herr Goebbels spoke of the burning of the books as a very symbolic act. The burning was not symbolical. The German fascist reactionaries are determined in actual fact, and quite unsymbolically, to burn anything printed which does not suit them, just as they are determined physically to exterminate all writers and distributors of anti-fascist literature. A blacklist. The Hugenberg organ, the Nachtausgabe, published on April 26, 1933, the following blacklist of literature which deserved to be burnt. Belles Lettres. Shalom Asch, Henri Barbusse, Bertolt Brecht, Max Brod, except his novel Tycho Brahe, Alfred Doblin, except for Wallenstein, Ilya Ehrenberg, Albert Ehrenstein, Arthur Flesser, Leon Feuchtwanger, Ivan Goll, Jaroslav Hasek, Walter Hasenclever, Arthur Holitscher, Heydrich Edward Jacob, Joseph Kalinikow, Gina Kaus, Egan Erwin Kisch, Heinz Liebmann, Heinrich Mann, except Flotten und Dolce, Klaus Mann, Robert Neumann, Ernst Ottwald, Kurt Pinthus, Theodor Plivier, Erich Maria Remarque, Ludwig Renn, only not Krieg, Alfred Schirokauer, Arthur Schnitzler, Richard Bierhoffen, Ernst Toller, Kurt Tucholsky, Arnold Zweig, Stefan Zweig, and Katharina Wirth-Soldat, by Adrienne Thomas. Political Science. Lenin, Karl Liebknecht, Karl Marx, Hugo Preuss, Walter Rathenau, Rudolf Hilferding, August Bebel, Max Adler, S. Aufhauser, E. I. Gumbel, N. Bukharin, L. Bauer, and Helen Keller. All of Lassalle, except for his Assizes speeches and on the special connection of the present historical period with the idea of the workers as a class. History. In general, all pacifist and defeatist works, also all pro-Bolshevik literature on Russian history, must be destroyed. This includes the work of Otto Bauer, Karl Schupik, Oskar Blum, Paul Hahn, Müller-Franken, Kurt Kerstein's Bismarck und seine Zeit, Franz Mehring's Zur deutschen Geschichte und zur prussischen Geschichte, and the works of Glacier and Upton Sinclair. Gutjahr, head of the Berlin-Brandenburg section of the German student organization, directed the burning of the books on the square in front of Berlin University. In addition to the works of the authors enumerated above, he also ordered to be thrown onto the flames the works of Engels, Sigmund Freud, Emil Ludwig, Alfred Kerr, Ossietzky, Theodor Wolff, George Bernhard, Bertha von Suttner, Rosa Luxemburg, Theodor Heuss, Freiherr von Schoenig, and Van de Velde. The ideological weakness of the Brown rulers manifests itself in this war of destruction waged against science and literature for the purpose of destroying everything that is necessary to an understanding of the history of culture and science. But Hitler's burning of all the works of progressive German thought cannot wipe out the memory of what mankind has owed in the past to German thought. The flames of the fires on the Berlin Opera Square have not destroyed Germany's ability to help forward the development of human culture. Not Hitler, Goebbels, Goering, and Rust are the representatives of the real German mind, but the millions of men and women whom the Hitler regime is now persecuting as anti-fascist workers, scientists, artists, and intellectuals. End of Chapter 6, Part 1. Chapter 6 of Brown Book of the Hitler Terror. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Brown Book of the Hitler Terror by Lord Marley. Chapter 6, Part 2. The Campaign Against Culture. Cleansing of the Prussian Academy of Poets. We are not here concerned with whether the Prussian Academy of Poets has produced any positive and really creative work during the existence of the Weimar Republic. Measured by their swastika successors, the poets who have been ejected from the Academy or forced to resign from it are indeed giants. First among the purged members of the Academy is Thomas Mann, the Nobel Prize winner and perhaps the most representative writer of bourgeois Germany. His crime was that in recent years he had been drawing closer to a social democratic standpoint, and had even, on several occasions, raised his voice against deliberate judicial murders, as in the cases of Sacco and Vanzetti and Ráhosi. He once described the National Socialist Party as the most noxious refuse of the age, and this crime will never be forgiven him. His brother, Heinrich Mann, tried to maintain the position of a free and independent mind. He caricatured the middle class of Imperial Germany, der Untertan, and also of the Republic, die Grosse Sache. He supported the Amsterdam International Anti-War Movement, and he has therefore, like his brother, had his books burnt, and he himself has been hunted out by Hitler's culture bearers. Jacob Wassermann is another of the writers who has incurred the Nazis' hatred. His books have been translated into many languages. His chief crime is that he is a Jew, and that he has expressed liberal ideas in his novels. Alfred Doblin, by profession a doctor in a working-class quarter of Berlin, also wrote a number of fantastic and, to some extent, exotic novels. Die drei Sprünge de Wang Lun, Wallenstein, Bürger, Mira und Giganten. His last novel was Berlin Alexanderplatz. In public debates, Doblin described himself as a class-conscious bourgeois. He experimented a great deal in his style and treatment, somewhat like the Irishman James Joyce in the American Dos Passos. Franz Werfel, who never went outside the range of bourgeois ideas, was the pioneer of Expressionism 20 years ago. His novel Verdi won him great popularity. The Nazis could not leave him alone. Others ejected were René Schickele, the German poet of Alsatian origin, and Leonhard Frank, author of the anti-war book Der Mensch ist gut and the novels Die Räuberbande and Die Ursache. Although he had been moving to the right during recent years, his past was enough to win for him the Nazis' hate. Dramatists turned out of the Academy included Georg Kaiser, whose talent was unique though extremely anarchist in tendency, and Fritz von Unruh, the dramatist of the Weimar Republic. Bernhard Kellermann, a gifted story writer of liberal tendencies, the poets Mombert and Rudolf Panwitz, and Ludwig Fulda, a writer of comedies, were all ejected. One of the few German women writers of any literary ability, Ricarda Huch, resigned from the Academy early in April. Among the politically colorless members of the Academy, such as Oskar Lurka and Jacob Schaffner, Gerhard Hauptmann must also be mentioned. These were allowed to remain in the Academy. Hauptmann, who wrote the story of the Weavers, had already been through many transformations. During the war, he was one of the 93 intellectuals who signed a manifesto supporting the warlords. After the war, he became the official poet of the Weimar Republic. And now he maintained a determined silence when the Brown Terror was driving the best bourgeois writers and scientists out of the country. And now for the men whom Rust, the Nazi Minister of Education, has brought into the Prussian Academy of Poets. The leading figure is Hans Jost, who once eagerly supported the revolution. But the crime of November 1918 is now forgiven. He is the only National Socialist writer who has achieved a certain reputation. At present his Schlageter drama is being played, on instructions from the Hitler government, in hundreds of German theatres. Its hero declares, "When I hear the word culture, I get my Browning ready." Herr Rust's special attractions in the Academy, apart from Hans Carossa, are quite insignificant writers like Emil Strauss, Will Vesper, Wilhelm Schaffer, Agnes Miegel, and Peter Dörfler. Hans Grimm wrote a novel on The Nation Without Room for Expansion, and Boris von Munchausen has written slight ballads expressing German sentiments. In their endeavour to find names of any kind of significance, the National Socialists even approached the poet Stefan George, the most snobbish and superior of all German poets, hoping to be able to use his name to grace Adolf Hitler's cultural policy. Brown Poetry. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda in the Third Empire, wrote a novel called Michael, A German Destiny in Diary Form. Michael, the yearning German soul, has visions. Evil appears to him in the form of Ivan the Russian, who tries to entice him into Bolshevism. Michael's soul struggles with the tempter. But I am stronger than he. Now I have him by the throat. Now I hurl him to the ground. There he lies. The death rattle in his throat and bloodshot eyes. Perish, carrion. I trample on his brains. And now I am free. That is the spirit which makes a man worthy of the Hitlerized Academy of Poets. I trample on his brains. Perish, carrion. The notorious writer Hans Heinz Ivers, who was appointed by Goebbels as head of the Association of German Authors after it had been brought into conformity, has not yet been officially admitted to the Academy of Poets. His pornographic novels, Alraune and Der Vampyr, were subsequently put on the list of filthy and disgusting literature by the Nazis themselves, and they were the only ones which really deserved it. But he is the official biographer of Horst Wessel, the hero of National Socialism. On Hitler's birthday, a Horst Wessel play by Evers was broadcast by the German wireless. This writer's existence had been completely forgotten for many years until he was resurrected to be the official poet of the Third Empire. In 1922, Ivers wrote a foreword expressing great sympathy for the Jews to Israel Zangwill's Die Stimme von Jerusalem. But the state of the market has altered since then, and Evers has become an anti-Semite. Thus, the Prussian Academy of Poets has been reconstructed under the banner of the spirit which expresses itself in such an awakening lyric as the following: All the little birds are already there. Air, Nun Ade, and All Little Birds. 1. Now adieu, my dear fatherland. At Strasburg a great lamentation begins. Hail to thee in thy crown of victory. A summons thunders through the land. Rosa Luxemburg is floating in the canal. Karl Liebknecht is hanging on the tree. 2. All little birds are already there. All little birds, all, thrush, finch, and tit, and the Reichsbanner black-red. What a pity that there's no gold, for ever a pity. From Germany Awake, the Small Nazi Songbook, Edition B, published by Paul Ehren, Sulzbach, Oberpfalz, 8th edition. It must not be thought that this gem of brown poetry, broadcast in the 8th edition, is not typical. There is no difference between this and the most popular Nazi songs. When Jewish blood spurts from under the knife, things will be twice as good as before, or The red brood beat them to a pulp, storm troops are on the march, clear the way. The campaign against un-German music. Herr Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda, told the German theatre managers and actors on May 9th that art comes from ability and not from the will. By way of illustrating this fine sentiment, we give below a further list of losses to German art. Bruno Walter, Otto Klemperer, and Fritz Busch were always reckoned among the best creative artists of Germany. For some years Otto Klemperer directed the Kroll Opera House in Berlin, and under him it became a centre of modern music. It was he who brought forward Hindemith and Kurt Weill. Klemperer was subsequently appointed to the State Opera House in Berlin, where he continued his work along the same lines. Now he has been forced to give up his conductor's baton because he is of Jewish origin. Bruno Walter, a conductor with a reputation throughout the world, is a Jew, and as art comes from ability, he may no longer conduct in Germany. His place is taken by a certain Herr Fusel, official musician to the Nazis. He was commander of a large brass band, in connection with whom no one can use the terms art and ability. But he will now show the awakened German nation how music is made. Busch, the musical director in Dresden, is fair, and so his Aryan origin cannot be disputed. He is a conservative, but as it happens not a Nazi. He brought a new era of fame to the Dresden Opera House. During the National Revolt, a Nazi denunciator appeared on the stage in the middle of a performance and demanded that Busch should resign his post. Berlin, March 8th. Yesterday evening 60 Nazi stormtroopers occupied the stage of the Municipal Opera House during the performance of Rigoletto, led by the famous conductor Busch. According to the account given by the Vossische Zeitung, the leader of the Nazis told the audience that in the future he himself would direct the theatre, and that the conductor Strieger would conduct the orchestra instead of Busch. As Busch nevertheless attempted to continue conducting, a terrific uproar arose among the Nazis who were present, and Busch was compelled to leave, while Strieger took his place at the conductor's desk. The best-known German pianist is Arthur Schnabel, who, in the course of 30 years' work, has developed into an interpreter of the great music written for the piano. He conducted an advanced class for piano music at the Berlin Academy of Music, and he has been turned out because he is a Jew. 2 of his colleagues have also been turned out of the Academy. Emil Feuermann, who is now the only German cellist of any standing, and Leonid Kreutzer, a good pianist and teacher. The first-rate violinist Karl Flesch has been dismissed. Also the well-known conductors Oskar Fried, Fritz Stiedry, and Gustav Brecher, as well as the prominent pianist Bruno Eisner. Of the creative musicians in Germany, Marx von Schillings immediately joined the Nazis. His compositions are not original, and his conducting nowhere gets beyond the formal pattern. Schillings, who under the Republic accepted high positions, became president of the Academy after Max Liebermann's resignation. He has found a friend equally loyal to the Nazis in the composer Hans Pfitzner, and another representative composer, Richard Strauss, has joined them. It is true that the latter's works, viewed from the Nazi standpoint, would satisfy the wanton Jewish sensual appetites, but he is now on the way to becoming an official composer. Hardly a single one of the modern German composers remains with the Nazis. Arnold Schönberg has been driven out of his post at the Academy of Music. Whatever one thinks of his music, he has certainly had the most important influence on the development of modern music. In politics, a conservative, Schönberg was a formal revolutionary in music and found a new and original musical language. But Nazi Germany cannot use this pioneer. One of the best-known German composers is Kurt Weill, whom Hitler's Germany has proscribed. He wrote the Dreigroschen opera, which achieved success throughout the world. But he is a Jew, and so he is now homeless. Franz Schreker, the best known of whose operas is Der Ferner Klang, was ejected from the Association of the Academy of Music. He is by no means particularly progressive, but his origin is not above reproach. The special hate of the Nazis was directed against the first proletarian revolutionary composer, Hans Eisler, who has also been driven out of Germany. In recent years, he has provided the German working class with choral pieces, Die Maßnahme, and popular fighting songs, which were sung in meetings and on the streets, and will soon become known in other countries. His music was consciously and consistently made for the working class. Hitler's Germany offered him either the drilling of the concentration camps or a martyr's death in some Nazi barracks. German music, which for some time has been in a general state of crisis, has now been deprived of its best forces. As a result of this action, the most famous conductor in the world, Arturo Toscanini, who works in Mussolini's Italy, has refused to take part in the Bayreuth Festival in connection with the anniversary of Richard Wagner. Early in June he sent the following telegram to Frau Winifred Wagner: "As events in Germany, which violate my feelings as an artist and as a man, in spite of my hopes show no change up to the present, I consider it to be my duty to break the silence which I have imposed on myself for the last 2 months, and to inform you that for my and your and everyone's peace of mind, it is better not to think any more of my coming to Bayreuth. With sentiments of unalterable friendship for the house of Wagner, Arturo Toscanini." Theatre, painting, films. The chauvinistic glorification of Schlageter and the idealization of Horst Wessel now dominate the German stage. Herr Goebbels has had his well-known drama Der Wanderer presented at a Berlin theatre. All actors who had given proof of any artistic ability are no longer to be seen on the German stage. All state, municipal, and private theatres have been brought into conformity. The actors' associations have been brought under the control of fascist commissioners. Fritz Kortner, Max Pallenberg, Massary and Bergner, and the stage managers Max Reinhardt and Jessner have been driven out of Germany as un-German. The artistic abilities of the opera stars Lotte Schöne, Frieda Leider, Alexander Kipnis, among others, no longer count under the dictatorship of Rust's brown culture. The proletarian singer and actor Ernst Busch, a highly gifted artist, who popularized Eisler's proletarian songs and won a name for himself among the German workers, was hunted out of Germany. Jewish actors only to play in negative roles. The UFA Film Company issued instructions that in their future films Jewish actors were only to be used in negative roles, such as swindlers, criminals, and pathological cases. On June 6, the general meeting was held of the Union of Stage Directors, which has been incorporated in the National Socialists' League of Fighters for German Culture. The government commissioner Hinkel announced at this meeting that there would be a new cleansing campaign among professional actors. On the recommendation of the Prussian Ministry of Education to the head of the government, Göring, the formation of a Prussian Theatre Commission has been announced. The work of this commission, of which Hinkel will be chairman, will be to investigate the position of all stage managers, musical directors, conductors, and soloists connected with all municipal theatres. Decrees will shortly be issued to facilitate the annulment, extension, or alteration of agreements, in order to ensure that no obstacles stand in the way of the artistic work which is essential in the German theatre. Legal measures will be taken to provide for the dissolution of private obligations where these are in conflict with the interests of the German theatre. Frankfurter Zeitung, June 8, 1933. The Nazi work of destruction is being carried on in every field of art. The president of the Academy of Arts, the painter Max Liebermann, a conservative in politics, was compelled to resign his post on the basis of the Aryan clause. It goes without saying that Kata Kollwitz, the gifted artist of working-class life, was banished by the Nazis. The number of painters and artists who have fallen victims to the German cleansing is legion. The best known and most progressive film directors have been forced to leave Germany to find employment. All film artists associated with the working class movement and all proletarian or progressive films have been placed on the blacklist. The following are some of the films which were immediately prohibited by the Hitler government: Kühle Wampe, Niemandsland, Kameradschaft, Mutter Krause, Die andere Seite, Das Testament des Dr. Mabuse, Im Westen nichts Neues, Frühenglück, Frühennot, Hölzerne Kreuze, a French film. Soviet films banned included The Path to Life, Storm over Asia, Mother, Menschenarsenal, 10 Days That Shook the World, The End of St. Petersburg. Woe to those who were suspected of too close connection with working-class films. An example of this is the imprisonment and maltreatment of Dr. A. Steigler by stormtroopers and auxiliary police. Steigler was director of a film company in Berlin, which, in the course of its work, rented Russian films. This was enough. The offices of the company were occupied by storm troops and police, and the whole staff was arrested. All films were confiscated, and the offices sealed up. The staff was taken to the Maikäfer barracks in Berlin, where, in the presence of his employees, Dr. Steigler was subjected to the most terrible maltreatment and torture. Storm troopers attacked him with their fists, clubs, and belts, and kicked him when he fell to the ground covered with blood. The schools of the Third Empire. They say that in your schools boys and girls fight together naked and are thus trained as warriors and Amazons. But do they also learn anything? And are not their carnal desires excited when they see each other thus? Not at all, my friend, for we wear them out till they can no longer breathe, and when they are tired they can neither think nor feel carnal desire. But how then do they acquire the sciences and arts which they must have, O wise lawgiver? They must not learn and they must not think, for whoever can think may think evil thoughts, but whoever is made perfect physically and made to toil the whole day long is capable of becoming a useful citizen. From a discussion on Spartan education in Greece. The Weimar Constitution made possible some, though inadequate, new experiments in school organization. It enabled scholars, at least in the large towns, to pass through the public schools without religious instruction. It left undisturbed the educational privileges of the rich, but it did at least lead to some hesitating experiments in the admission of workers to the universities and in giving them special training for university work. Now the schools have once again been transformed, from top to bottom, into drilling grounds of the Christian religion. Experiments, such as that made by the Karl Marx Realgymnasium in Neukölln, the use of modern teaching methods, the subdivision of courses into a number of separate groups based on the special interests of the pupils, and the systematic preparation of workers for the universities, have been stopped and prohibited. In My Fight, Hitler outlined his program for the schools. It was much the same as that of the Spartan cynics cited above. The meaning of Hitler's program is that the schools of the Third Empire will not be expected to provide the children with knowledge and science, but to make them obedient to the leader. And Frick says in a less open form what Hitler says bluntly and without circumlocution. On May 9th, Frick laid down his program at a meeting of the ministers of education of the various states. He told them that up to now the whole system has been wrong, that children have been instructed, not educated. A fine distinction, but what is Frick aiming at? Today, we have more reason than ever to recall that, hand in hand with our kindred Germanic peoples of Northern Europe and their daughter states beyond the seas, we have to fulfill tasks throughout the world which will give the Nordic race a wide field of constructive cultural work. The kindred peoples here are not clearly defined. It would appear that Herr Frick hopes to unite them all against the sub-men in order to create a world-embracing Third Empire, which will show the inferior peoples of Latin or other races how things are managed in a real Hitler Empire. Together with the development of purely physical suppleness and ability, special emphasis must be laid on the formation of will power and the power to make decisions as the essential basis for the development of a sense of pleasure in taking responsibility, which lies at the root of character. Though expressed in involved language, this corresponds closely enough with the maxims laid down by the Spartan cynic. The schools are to produce uneducated, uninstructed, but well-drilled, dauntless soldiers of the Third Empire. In order to convince the children that nothing as good as the Third Empire exists in the world must be completely distorted as it is shown to them. Hence, history must be falsified and made National Socialist. The new history books must contain as little as possible. Considerable abridgment is indispensable. It is therefore sufficient to bring out the historical forces which have always been operative. The 2 last decades of our own age must be the main object of historical treatment. To make things plainer, Frick added that it would be particularly necessary to deal with the beginning of the awakening of the nation in the struggle for the Ruhr, up to the victory of the idea of National Socialist freedom and the restoration of the German nation at the Festival of Potsdam. In addition to this type of historical science, other subjects particularly insisted on for the schools are racial science and the elementary study of the basic conceptions of family research. The Bavarian Ministry of Education issued instructions containing the following passage. At the beginning of the school year 1933-34, apart from all other subjects and lessons, all classes in the state of Bavaria must arrange for history lessons in the first 4 to 6 weeks, covering the period 1918 to 1933. The remainder of the curriculum in this subject must be correspondingly shortened and allocated to the remaining months of the year. At the conclusion of this course, the last lesson must be organized as an ennobling celebration, with short addresses by the teacher and one of the pupils on the national awakening, the singing of patriotic songs, etc. This theme, the national awakening, which is most important for the reawakening of national sentiment among the Bavarian youth in the schools, is not only to be treated as a subject in the study of history, health science, etc., but must also be dealt with fundamentally as a principle of education. If examinations are to be held at the end of the year, special attention must be paid to this theme. The Government Commissioner in Berlin, Dr. Meinhausen, stated in a speech on the transformation of Berlin school life, which was published in the Völkischer Beobachter of May 6, 1933, that a halt must be put to all liberal sentimental dreams. In the Jewish question the principle must be sentimentality is high treason. In accordance with this, the Nazi Minister of Education has completely reshaped all pedagogical colleges and dismissed all teachers who were suspect. All secular schools are liquidated. Religious education is once again compulsory. The reintroduction of whipping was the first achievement of Brown school policy. All modern tendencies in the schools have been completely rooted out. The pupils in the top class at the unorganized Karl Marx school in Neukölln have all been put back 2 years. Before they are allowed to proceed with their studies, they have to be first drilled in the pure Nazi spirit. Jewish students as well as Jewish professors were driven out of the universities. Henceforward, only 1.5% of new entrants to the higher educational institutions may be non-Aryan. Instructions of the Prussian Ministry of Education, May 8, 1933. All teachers are compelled to join the National Socialist Teachers Union. This is a condition of employment. The following clauses are contained in the Act against the overcrowding and excessive proportion of persons of foreign race in the universities. 1. In all schools other than compulsory schools, the number of scholars and students is to be restricted so as to guarantee adequate education and to conform with the needs of the professions. 2. In accepting new entrants, care must be taken that the number of those of German nationality who are of non-Aryan origin within the meaning of the law for the restoration of a professional civil service of April 7, 1933, in relation to the total number of students in each institution and faculty, does not exceed the proportion of non-Aryans in the German population. This proportion is fixed for Germany as a whole as 1.5%. 7. The Act comes into force from its promulgation. Legal examinations simplified for Nazis. The Reich Commissioner for the Prussian Ministry of Justice, Kurl, issued instructions on April 5th that all candidates in legal examinations who have served the fatherland for a certain period in one of the recognized national associations may, at their request, be allowed a shortened form of examination by way of compensation for the time lost to their studies. Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung, April 12, 1933. The spirit of the students who burn books. 1. Language and literature grow from the nation. 2. Today there is a contradiction between literature and the German nation. This is a shameful state of things. 3. Purity of language and literature depends on you. 4. Our most dangerous opponent is the Jew. 5. The Jew can only think Jewish. If he writes German, he is lying. The German who writes German and thinks Jewish is a traitor. 6. We mean to put an end to this lie. We mean to brand this treachery. 7. We mean to treat the Jew as a foreigner, and we mean to take the nation seriously. We therefore demand from the censorship the following. Jewish works must be published in Hebrew. If published in German, they must be described as translations. Only Germans have the right to write in German. The un-German spirit must be eradicated from public libraries. The German Student Organization, from the 12 Theses against the un-German spirit, posted in Berlin University on April 13, 1933. Bringing the press into conformity. On the evening of January 30, 1933, the day when the Hitler-Hugenberg government was formed, the new minister, Frick, summoned the representatives of the Berlin press to a conference, at which he promised that the new government would be distinguished from its forerunners by its maintenance of the freedom of the press. A few days after the word of a German man had been given, a wave of prohibitions of the communist and social democratic press swept through Germany. By the middle of February, practically the whole of the German communist press had been closed down. Prohibitions of social democratic and democratic papers descended like hail. In the course of the Reichstag election campaign, storm troops went into the printing offices of the center newspapers in the Rhineland, compelled them to print the speeches of National Socialist ministers, and, with the support of the police authorities, exercised a rigid censorship over what was to appear. In the course of the last few days before the burning of the Reichstag, Frick's freedom of the press had been almost completely crushed out by the storm troops and police. The destruction of working-class printing works and newspaper offices was only prevented by defensive guards. When the Nazis succeeded in bringing off their monstrous act of provocation in the Reichstag, and the Brown Terror began to rage, the last remaining of the communist and social democratic papers were wiped out. Communist, social democratic, and bourgeois journalists of left tendencies were cast into prison or delivered over to sadistic tortures in Nazi barracks. The democratic bourgeois press and the center newspapers began to be brought into conformity with the new pogrom regime. The democratic publishing houses of Ullstein and Mosse and the liberal press throughout Germany began the voluntary removal of Jewish, pacifist, or other members of their editorial staffs who were not liked by the Nazis. And this press, too, celebrated the fateful events of these days and declared in support of the awakening of the nation for Hitler. It suppressed the reports of the massacres in the working class quarters. It suppressed the acts of brutality which were taking place daily only a few minutes away from the editorial offices. The Jewish papers denied the persecution of the Jews. The foreign press, which was not so accommodating in the matter of suppressing the inhuman cruelties which were taking place, soon came into conflict with the Hitler government. On March 7th an official government communiqué was issued. In view of the malicious reports in the foreign press as to what is taking place in Germany, serious measures against a number of foreign correspondents are in preparation. Some of the correspondents concerned have escaped the hands of the police by leaving the country. As far as the other correspondents are concerned, they will have to guarantee that in the future they will avoid any malicious tendencies in their reports and any ambiguous statements. In consideration of this, the correspondents in question have not been expelled for the time being. They have been granted a probationary period of 2 months. On April 5th, the Hitler government suffered a defeat at the hands of the Foreign Press Association. It had threatened the association with a boycott if it did not remove its president, Maurer, correspondent of the Chicago Daily News. The general meeting of the association decided by 60 votes to 7, with 3 abstentions, not to accept Maurer's resignation. In the course of the following weeks, public opinion abroad compelled the Hitler government to make further retreats in its dealings with the foreign press correspondents in Germany. The German Press Association was brought into conformity by the appointment of the Nazi press chief Dietrich as president. Similar measures were applied to the German Newspaper Proprietors Association and the Association of Publishers of Periodicals. All district organizations of publishers and journalists were brought into conformity. The German Press Association, under its new president, decided that in future no Jewish or Marxist journalists would be admitted to membership. The Germanizing of its editorial staff and its humble submission to Hitlerite policy was not of much avail to the Rudolf Mosse Publishing Company, which owns the Berliner Tageblatt. Early in April the company was virtually expropriated and taken over by a newly formed company controlled by a Nazi commissioner. A new editorial staff, which could furnish the necessary guarantees of loyalty to Hitler, was appointed. Another example of the many cases in which non-working class papers have been brought into conformity is that of the Dortmunder General Anzeiger, which was voluntarily transformed into an organ of the National Socialist Party. This paper has the largest printing works in Europe and the biggest circulation of all German newspapers outside of Berlin. As its circulation was mainly in the thickly populated industrial areas of the Rhine and Westphalia, its contents made some concessions to the anti-capitalist and anti-fascist feelings of the workers there. On the formation of the Hitler government, the former editorial staff was dismissed, to enable the paper to be brought voluntarily into conformity along the usual lines. But this did not satisfy the Brown rulers. In the issue of April 20th, among various hymns of praise for the occasion of Hitler's birthday, there appeared a drawing of Hitler, which the Nazi leaders declared was a caricature. They therefore seized the issue and closed the offices of the paper. The Dortmund police president entrusted the editor of the Nazi journal Red Earth with the management of the printing works. The Nazis then threatened the proprietor with the permanent prohibition of the Dortmunder General Anzeiger, on which the proprietor declared his readiness to transform the paper into an official Nazi organ. And thus the Nazis conquered this great printing establishment. It is not possible to enumerate all the prohibitions and warnings which have been directed against bourgeois papers and periodicals. The campaign of bringing into conformity led to a dictatorial transformation of the whole of the German press services. Readers of the newspapers which still appear in Germany are hermetically sealed off from all reliable foreign news. Over 250 foreign newspapers are forbidden in Germany, from the following countries: United States 9, Argentina 2, Belgium 7, Canada 2, Danzig 3, Great Britain 5, France 31, Holland 9, Lithuania 2, Latvia 1, Luxembourg 5, Austria 37, Poland 24, Romania 1, Czar Territory 4, Sweden 1, Switzerland 26, Soviet Union 9, Spain 2, Czechoslovakia 66. Germany was the country which had the greatest literary output. The following announcement is significant of the fall in production during the first few weeks of the Hitler regime. According to the Frankfurter Zeitung of April 15, 1933, in the course of the National Revolution, production in paper mills sank in many cases to 25%. The Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung of April 22 reports that the publishing output in the first quarter of 1933 was 30% lower than in the same quarter of 1931. The export trade continues to register a decline. The German book trade has been deprived of its best customers and of a whole range of science and literature. End of chapter 6, part 2.